Royal Commissioners now in session, please be seated.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, Mrs Nievenhoven.
Thank you.
If you just repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
will be the truth,
will be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Mrs. Bergen.
What is your full name?
Catharina Christina Nievenhoven.
And how old are you, Mrs Nievenhoven?
Nearly 79 in a couple of weeks.
Where do you live?
I live in Perfect Gardens, South Australia.
Have you prepared a statement for the Royal Commission?
I did.
And is there a copy of your statement there in front of you?
There is.
Do you have any amendments to your statement?
No.
Is it true and correct to the best of your information and belief?
Yes, it is.
I tender the statement of Catherine Gesina Nievenhoven dated the 2nd of October 2019.
Yes, thank you. That will be Exhibit 10-25.
Mrs Nievenhoven, you were born to parents in Amsterdam in the
That's
Netherlands, and you lived in Amsterdam with your family,
Yeah, I did.
and you had 7 siblings,
I did.
and you lived there until you were nearly 16 years old.
That's correct.
You came to Australia by ship with your family, and you initially stayed in a hostel in Woodside in
We
South
did.
Australia, and then you later moved to the northern suburbs of Adelaide.
We did.
You've now been in Australia for over 60 years. Where did your parents meet?
They met in Amsterdam. They lived not far away from one another at all, in the middle of Amsterdam.
And what was your role in the family with 7 siblings?
I was the eldest of 8 children, of course, and I didn't always have to take care of my family, but often I did.
Your parents moved to Australia in 1956.
That's right.
Why did they decide to move to Australia?
Because at the time, in '56, there was a war looming in Hungary, and my parents said, we've already had 2 world wars and we want to get out. And Australia wanted people to work here, and Holland wanted to get rid of people. So it was an exchange.
How did you remain connected with the Dutch community after moving to Australia?
Because we always mixed with the group Dutch people for quite a while until we more or less felt comfortable with the Australian society. A lot of people did that. You stuck to your own community for a while, but then you moved out and you mixed with the Australian society.
Now, after moving to Australia, you met Willie, who was coincidentally on the same ship as you from the Netherlands to Australia, but that's not
right.
how you met.
Yes.
How did you meet?
My husband wanted to be a Catholic at the time, and my father was quite a strict Catholic. And so my husband was sent by the Dutch priest at the time to see my father, and that's how we met.
You and Willie had 7 children together,
That's right.
and your children to this day live in South Australia or in Queensland?
4 in Queensland and 3 in South Australia.
Unfortunately, Willie died in 2001, and he was 66.
That's right.
And you continue to live in the northern suburbs of Adelaide in a house by yourself.
That's right.
Mrs Nievenhoven, tell us about your mother.
I had a good mother. She developed cancer. I've forgotten the date, but it's in there. And then she got better after a while. But when my father died, she got the cancer back again. And she became quite incapable of looking after herself. She was too frightened. So she lived with my sister for 5 years until she needed hospice care, which was very difficult to get at the time.
When did she start to need assistance?
When she was dying, because she couldn't speak the language at all, and she was quite fluent in English. But my brother said one day, for goodness sake, go and see Mother, I can't understand her at all. She's all yabbling away in Dutch, which I thought was very sad, because in her dying days there was nobody that could assist her.
So your mother reverted to the Dutch language
Exactly.
late in life as her health
Exactly.
deteriorated? And where was she living at after the cancer diagnosis?
She was in 3 different hospices at the time, and at the time you could only stay for 6 or 8 weeks, then we had to shift her. And she finally died in Mary Potter.
Did you look for a facility for your mum in South Australia where the staff spoke Dutch?
It wasn't available. It just wasn't there at the time. It wasn't catering for migrants at all.
And what were your reflections on this gap at the time?
I felt very sad, and that's why I looked into the Dutch community as a whole, and I thought that's going to happen to some of those people as well.
What did this prompt you to do?
My mother's inability to speak the English language.
Operator, could you bring up tab 121? Mrs. Nievenhoven, this is a letter that you wrote in about 1989. And there's a English translation on the right-hand side of your Dutch, of your letter in Dutch. What publication was this in?
In the
Was it a letter to the Dutch Social
Dutch
Club?
community, the Dutch Social Club in
And
Salisbury.
And it's published in a historical...
No, it's just in their Dutch letter, their communication letter they sent to the Dutch people.
I see.
Nothing official.
I see. Could you tell us what prompted you to write this letter?
Well, as I said, when I looked at the amount of people that were there at the time, and I think there were about, well, don't take it for granted, but I think about 300 people, and I thought that's going to die down because these people are all my parents' age. And surely an amount of people there would need care where the Dutch language is at least understood, maybe not spoken, but understood.
At the foot of the letter, you have a request to the people who are reading the publication, and you say that it's so important, especially as one gets older, to be able to maintain a cosy environment and Dutch customs. It may be possible to hire a home because the need may perhaps only be for 15 to 20 years. Don't wait till it is needed because it will be too late. Something needs to be done now. Interested people can ring me. Did many people ring you?
4.
And what did they ring you to say?
They said, you can't do it, you're opening a can of worms.
And that was in response to your proposal to
My letter.
set up an aged Dutch home or nursing home
That's correct.
in Adelaide. What did you do next?
Well, I wasn't going to give up. So I wrote to the Dutch community. They had a home in Victoria. I went there and they said, we can't help you, we can help you with suggestions, but that's all. We haven't got any money at all. So then I called another meeting in Adelaide and in a Dutch club, and I had 20. From there I called a meeting on the Dutch radio in Adelaide and I had 40. And from then I had a man who worked with the government and he knew where to pull the strings, so to speak. He knew his way around. He was a great help at the time to help us set up. So
And at this time, were you looking for sources of funds?
I did.
And where did the funds come from?
From us, we used to run bingo, rice dinners. My husband and I used to go at 4 o'clock to Dress and Treasure trying to sell some stuff so that we had some money. We had to show the government that we could raise some money in order to get a grant. So, and my husband and I opened a tax file so that we could claim at least some of the money. We had no money at all. So, and then, we raised quite a bit of money. And then I remembered that there was a fund in the Netherlands for migrants. The Queen said that. So I wrote to my cousin, and within 4 weeks I had a big cheque back. So we showed the cheque to Neil Blewett at the time, and then we got the grant for 1.6 million.
For 1.6 million. And the cheque that you received from the Netherlands, who provided that?
The Dutch government through Queen Juliana. Actually, it was her fund, but I don't know any more about it. I just wrote to my cousin and she sent the cheque back. So I don't know what she did at the time, but it was a miracle.
So then you had sufficient funds to build your dream. And how did you go about the next phase?
Well, we had a committee of, I can't even remember that, maybe about 12. Among them was an architect who's since passed away, and he worked with the Housing Trust. So again, he knew who to ask, where we could start. And I wanted a home in my area because my friends all lived there. But the Salisbury Council said we don't need it. We've got enough homes. And so the Marion Council was the only one that said, we will have you, providing you give room to anybody, any nationality. Mm-hmm. But since we were filled up, then if a Dutch or Belgian person comes for a room, they get preference to another person if there is no more other room, yeah.
Mm. So when the facility opened, how many beds did it have?
36.
And what services did it offer?
The Dutch community, the Dutch language spoken and Dutch customs, which was very important. Yeah, and usually aged care, but very cosy.
Very cosy.
Flowers everywhere, tablecloth, and yeah, I felt quite at home. Paintings on all the walls, and yeah, it was typical Dutch.
And what did you call it? What did you call
Rembrandt
the facility?
Living. Mm-hmm.
How's it going now?
Well, we've got 90 rooms now. It's quite they had a big extension some years ago, and yeah, it's doing okay.
How do you remain involved?
No, I just remember, I'm just the organiser, I suppose, but no, it's too far away. I'd love to, but it's too far away.
Mm-hmm. When you needed respite care yourself, did you go there?
Yes, I did, and for a fortnight, and I was thoroughly spoiled. And I felt quite at home, but my eldest son said, you referred back to Dutch so quickly when you were in there, so... But I saw the care, especially of a very dement lady, old lady, and they spoke to her in Dutch and fed her and cleaned her, and the care was really very gentle, so that impressed me, really did. Yeah.
In your statement, you explained that you receive home care services through Rembrandt Living now. How do you, and that you have sometimes conversations in Dutch with,
yes, I do.
With the care worker?
Mm-hmm.
How did you go about organising a Dutch-speaking care worker?
Oh, I didn't, because there are many different nationalities working for our Rembrandt. She just happened to be Dutch, so we have a coffee and I make her lunch, and it's nice, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
How often does she come to visit you?
Once a week.
And what services does she provide?
Once a week she vacuums and washes floor, and the other week she changes the bed and hang out the washing because I can't use my arm.
Mm. Mrs. Nievenhoven, are there other aspects of sort of culturally sensitive care that you receive through your home care package?
No, I don't think so. Or did I mention that?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
But what would you ask for if there were? Would there be changes that you'd ask for if you could change anything about the way your home care package services work to make them more culturally appropriate? Or are you happy with them as they are?
I'm happy the way it is.
Okay.
Thank you.
How did you find the process of applying for a home care package through My Aged Care?
I didn't know much about it, and my doctor recommended I needed some help, and then through working with the council, which I do, I had a lady, and she was in charge, and she said, Tina, don't say anything, I'll be there when you are assessed. So she was a great help for me to be there, and I was assessed at level 2, and then later on somebody came some years later and I was assessed at level 3.
Mm. And Tina is your care worker, is that right?
Sorry?
Who was Tina that you mentioned?
No, I'm Tina.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Who was the person that attended with you when you had the ACAD assessment?
The first one was Sue Leckie, and the second one, I'm not sure now. I can't remember her name.
Sure. How did you go? How did you find reading the home care package agreement?
I found it quite difficult. I didn't know in the beginning what I was entitled to at all. I read through it quite a few times, but as my saying is it's all a little bit in high English. It's all right if you're university educated. But for the normal people, some of the wording is difficult to understand, especially for, I'm a migrant and I can read it.
Yes.
But a lot of people are just from a simple background and they don't understand.
Yes. In the future, if you had to go into a residential aged care facility, would you consider going to Rembrandt Living?
I would, because I'm so Dutch.
And what are the features of the facility that are particularly Dutch?
Well, we celebrate, for instance, a king's birthday, and Christmas is same in Australia anyway, but we have quite a few sing-songs that in our language, and people interact with one another, yeah. It's just different. It's not that you get less care, you don't, because I helped for 10 years. I was a minister in aged care for 10 years, so they get good care anywhere. It's just the atmosphere.
Mm. And is that partly about facilitating social connection?
Yes, that's what it is. That's what it is. Especially when people lose their language in dementia, as I've mentioned before. It's very necessary that they're understood. Not so much to be spoken to. You can always get some helper that will, translate for them. But then the need is there when a person is, sick and not being able to speak the English language.
Mm.
Yeah.
Do many of the staff speak Dutch at Rembrandt Living?
Fair amount, not all, but a fair amount. There are quite a few staff working from different nationalities. I spoke to somebody from Bhutan, from China, Indonesia, and they all said, we're so happy working here and the atmosphere is really good. So that's a compliment to the home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And why do they say that the atmosphere is good, do you know?
Well, I think because the interaction between people and the CEO, she's very good in taking care of her establishment. She's very good. So that makes a difference too. So, yeah.
Are there many Dutch-speaking residents at Rembrandt Living?
I think the majority would be Dutch. Not all, because I've spoken to a few from different culture, but the majority is, yeah.
Mm. In your statement, you say that you worked as a community liaison officer.
Yes, I do.
Could you tell us when was that?
Oh, I've been like that for about 4 or 5 years, I suppose. It's all to do with the council.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Northern Community Ambassador as well, and I travel on public transport quite a bit, and you talk to people at bus stops and everywhere, and people complain about something, and I said, well, I've got this package, or I need care, where will I go? And so I tell them, well, you first got to be assessed, so here's my number for my aged care, that's the first step you do. And then you just have to ask for a better explanation of what you're entitled to, because they're quite surprised what you can do with your package. Mm. And that's the whole problem, I think, if a migrant gets a package. It first of all needs to be explained an interpreter when they get assessed, and then when they get the package, they need to have an interpreter again to explain what they can do with their package in simple language. Mm. And I think that's not quite there.
Mm. Are you aware whether there are state or Commonwealth services offered that if you're, say, not available and other community liaison officers aren't available to meet with a client, mm-hmm. Are there any funded staff or funded services to help people with access in South Australia?
I'm not sure. I don't know at all. But I think the basic thing is they need to know much more advertised, maybe in community groups, how to do it and have it written down, not just said in the hall because people forget altogether. It has to be more simple, in my opinion, and it has to be interpreted by proper interpreters, not by people that have just lived here a year, because they don't get the proper interpretation at all. It needs to be proper interpreters.
Mm. And when you say that you meet with people and explain that the options that they might want to consider through, for example, home care package services. Do you meet with them face to face?
Yes, I talk to them on the bus or the train, not often, but in shopping centres as well, because they know me quite well, and it's hygiene. And then people talk to you if you're open to that. Some people don't want to talk, and they often complain to me, and I said, well, don't complain to me. This is what you have to do in order to get things done.
And you were saying that about the importance of interpreter services to help people, migrant communities, for example, understand the services that are available. Are you aware of what's available in your area if people need an interpreter?
No, I haven't gone into that at all. No.
Commissioners, that concludes my examination of Mrs. Nievenhoven.
Mrs. Nieuwenhoven, thank you very much for your explanation of the challenges in the Dutch community. I am listening to your comment about needing explanation around not only how you go about applying for a package, but also once you get one, what you can do with it. It strikes me that might also be a problem for the general Australian community. Have you found that?
Yes, I have, because it's mainly Australian or English-speaking people I talk to. Yes, they said it's too difficult. I can't understand it, and yeah.
Yeah, so that would suggest that everyone needs a bit of help in establishing what your particular needs are, and then designing a package of services around those needs.
That's exactly right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Nieuwenhoven. Thank you for your evidence. It's been very helpful and very interesting.
Thank you.
You may go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. If we could please have a short adjournment to
Yes.
allow for some logistics.
How long do you think we should?
Just a couple of minutes.
5 minutes. Right. We'll adjourn
Thank
for
you,
about 5
Commissioner.
minutes.
All stand. The Royal Commission is temporarily adjourned.
Commissioners, there's going to be a slight reordering of the timetable in relation to the next witnesses. The next witness that I will call is Miss Maureen Lyons, who's currently in the box, and then that will follow with the evidence of Uncle Brian Campbell and Uncle Brian Birch subsequently. Thank you.
I solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
So your full name is Maureen Mary Lyons,
That's correct.
and you've prepared a statement for the Royal Commission.
I did.
Thank you. And operator, please call WIT stop 0424 stop 0001 stop 0001. Is this a copy of the statement in front of you?
It is.
And do you have any amendments you wish to make to the statement?
I don't.
Are the contents of the statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. I tender the statement of Miss Maureen Mary Lyons dated 9 October 2019.
Yes, thank you. That statement will be Exhibit 10-26.
Thank you. Ms Lyons, you're currently employed as the Chief Executive Officer of the Aboriginal Community Elders Service.
That's right.
And how long have you been in that role for?
I commenced on the 15th of June this year.
Yes. And what was your professional experience prior to that role?
I've worked predominantly in my career as in industrial relations specialist, but in more recent years in diversity inclusion, writing employment strategies for Aboriginal employment, preparing the workplace, and working on projects for the Birch Land Council, which is my people, my clan.
Yes. And the Aboriginal Community Elders Service, it's an Aboriginal controlled not-for-profit care service.
That's right.
And what do the various arms of its services include?
There is 25 beds, which are split between high needs and what you would say lower needs, more of a hostel environment. And there are day programs where there are about 30 participants come in and do planned programs every day.
Okay. And what are the types of things that the day program involve?
Well, it varies considerably, and it is guided often by what the participants are more focused around. At the moment, we've just commenced an arts project with Aboriginal artist Mick Hoarding, and they're going to do some significant pieces together in relation to that project. But they will work on there's men's shed on the Wednesday, and the women's group later in the week. But they'll craft boomerangs. They'll get experts in to teach didgeridoo making. There's a lot of traditional artwork, Aboriginal artwork. They enjoy very much sewing and making different... They've done some beautiful weaving with Aboriginal totems and Torres Strait Islander, beg your pardon. And it's very varied. They'll go out to exhibitions, activities such as aqua swimming, because they're an older group of people. They like to have different sort of physical activities as well that are suitable. The programs are designed in conjunction with the participants.
Yeah. And what type of people are the participants?
They're Aboriginal men and women, and Aboriginal men and women with sort of challenges intellectually. Then we have programs specifically designed, and that's been a more recent intake, and the feedback from family and carers has been very positive for people participating and having that sense of community coming together.
Yes. And what type of age range are the participants?
Predominantly, the day programmers are older, but there are some younger people coming in more from the group homes with different challenges. So that's a mixed age group. The residential care, the high needs is sort of much older, up to sort of 90s, and the hostel we're finding we're getting applications from younger Aboriginal men and women, and that the intake is 45, unless it's an emergency, we'll vary it.
Yeah, 45. And do you have many younger residents in the residential aged care facility?
Yeah, we are finding there is an increased demand and increased supports required in terms of allied health professionals and psychiatric services.
And are you able to explain a bit in your experience, what are the types of circumstances that have led these younger residents to require aged care at an earlier age?
They typically have experienced considerable childhood and later in life trauma. It's very much connected to the intergenerational trauma of survivors of genocide. So there's a multitude of traumas that are involved in that process. Those traumas are contributors to chronic health issues earlier or later in life, depending on the circumstances that that person's been living through. We have people in the higher needs care that are now, surviving the stolen generation, that didn't know they had family until they turned up at the door when they were 14.
Just take a little while, have a drink of water, you'll be fine.
They got turned out of these institutions at age 12 with nothing in their pocket, no family or anybody to look after them. Which I just can't understand why anyone would do that. And I think for many of our residents, ACES offers probably the first taste of a routine of care and genuine care and support, a safe cultural and spiritual environment where they know they won't be turned out and they won't be hurt or harmed. And that has tremendous healing.
Yes. And you mentioned that there's often chronic health issues. What are the types of issues that you often see amongst your residents?
There's a body of respected Australian and international research on First Nation people that have been, through the circumstances, not dissimilar to Australia, and the findings are that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, as they age, are ageing more rapidly than non-Indigenous people, and will be 3 to 5 times more likely to suffer from dementia. And that is directly linked, the studies are showing, to childhood trauma. And many of the physical issues, chronic health issues, and multiple chronic health issues are coming on earlier in life. And these studies are also showing that these are drivers of trauma that have come out of arising from trauma.
And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are eligible to receive aged care services at your facility from age 45.
Yes.
Do you think that that's an appropriate age for eligibility?
I think that yes, it is. I would even suggest there's probably a need for there to be more flexibility to accept younger people.
And why do you think that would be?
I just think the demand, there's people that are coming in that are elders but they're homeless. You had a woman in recently, an Aboriginal woman, she was living in the park and had to fend off 2 assailants with a deodorant spray. There's some really horrific stories coming in, and I think, and a lot of the social support organisations ring in, and we have accepted people under 45 because they've really needed that support. We get a lot of calls from the sort of domestic violence Aboriginal services, and again, we take residents from those areas. So we find in the residential area it's a different type of accommodation that's needed, and there's more of an interest in, as people heal and feel safe, to want to do training and thinking about work and thinking about some of those more challenging things as they progress. They become more social. They really blossom within the environment, I've noticed, and quite quickly. Yeah.
And do you think for those Aboriginal people that are entering your services earlier, that you're in effect filling a gap for services that don't exist elsewhere?
Absolutely. And, you know, the clinical director comes over quite regularly and we talk about, you know, the different needs. Someone cannot be separated from their pet, their dog or cat, and how, you know, we don't reject those people because that's a family member. We think about how we can accommodate it. Some people will need some additional support to buy dog food and so on. But that would be another trauma, to try and separate people from, probably for some people, their only kind of family member. So we, again, try and keep everyone safe, obviously, but we want to accommodate those supports where possible.
Sure. And how is it that your service is funded?
The majority of our funding, around 75%, is Commonwealth funding. We receive various grants from the state and specific funding such as training an Aboriginal workforce, which is terrific and is really a huge bonus to our organisation. It provides us a lot of flexibility in training up Aboriginal people across a variety of areas, so that's terrific support there.
Yes, and I'll turn to the topic of your workforce shortly. But firstly, I wanted to ask you about the services guiding principles which are Aboriginal values and respect for the elders. How important is an understanding of Aboriginal values to provide culturally safe care to Aboriginal people?
It's absolutely fundamental because it's a part of how they'll measure whether they're safe or not, and whether they can relax, and whether they'll be accepted. And, you know, there's still very high incidence of discrimination and racism prevalent. I've had residents come back really distressed from quite blunt interactions with culturally insensitive providers, and they've wanted to speak to a counsellor, but they want to speak to an Aboriginal counsellor. Understanding the ceremonies are vital, or people will not feel settled and you know, cared for appropriately if those things are not in place and not understood. And a part of that is having Aboriginal employees working at the service.
And in practice, how do you go about trying to understand the individual backgrounds of various residents in your care?
There's certainly the history taken upon admission, but that's not the whole story. And the bigger picture and the story and the trauma that is shared in a trusting environment over time. And you know, the organisation is run collectively, so residents can have, for example, their lunch in their room if they want to, but in the dining room, that's where everyone will come together and talk, and staff will sit with residents and have a yarn, and it's very communal in that sense. And you build up relationships, and, you know, sit in the garden with residents, and just after a while, once they get to know you, will tell you about their life and different stories about what's happened. And so it's, you know, I brought my puppy in yesterday because we'd had one of the family had died, and everyone was a bit down, and it just brought so much joy to everybody, and everyone sort of wanted to adopt him straight away. So things like that are kind of done together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And you note in your statement that 35% of your workforce is Aboriginal. What are the benefits of having Aboriginal staff for your residents?
Because there's the immediate recognition of often where probably one of the first questions is who's your mob and where's your clan, and they'll know their ancestors or their aunts or uncles, or, you know, everyone knows everyone in some respect, you know, through somebody, and that's very comforting to the elders, and they'll talk about those commonalities in friends and family. It's also very important that there's a flow of ceremony occurring, so that when someone has passed, there's a smoking ceremony in that room, that people that want to have to return on land, and we'll have those discussions, that people understand what those discussions mean and what they're about. Men shed, women's circle, and culturally that's something that Aboriginal employees certainly come in knowing.
In relation to returning to land, is that something that many of your residents seek to do?
Yes. Yes, it's a bit harder for some than others. There's one of our older residents goes up to Dimboola, which is now known as Whale, every year, and stays at a sort of a hospital environment up there, but there's a real need to return to land. There's another one of our residents that we're planning to help her, but she wants to go back to Torres Straits Island. The call to land is very strong, to return to land is very strong, and a part of why there needs to be sometimes financial support to allow people to fulfil their spiritual needs.
And in terms of finding Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander staff to work in your facility, do you find that challenging?
There's a very good network, word of mouth. With the funding that we get, we're able to train people, so sort of rotate them in through different positions to train them, so that our head of catering came in and started an apprenticeship, and he's Aboriginal. People that are in management roles came in, as a program assistant over years, developed their skills, done different training. So we have a keen eye to assist Aboriginal staff develop their careers, and we're working with some of the universities to rotate out to the units there to give them a bit of a taste of different environments as well, that this is not the only safe place to work. But not so far. I think we've had a lot of interest to work at ACES.
And in terms of the balance of your workforce that's not Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, what's their background like?
We have a significant percentage of Sudanese in working, doing their nursing degrees in the residential area, Indian, Pakistan. So that I think would be about 5 or 10% just Australian. It's a very multicultural environment.
Yes. And how do you educate those staff members on understanding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander needs and how to provide culturally safe care to those?
We have ongoing training, and we encourage. So we have cultural awareness training. That's a part of our training schedule. We have guest speakers coming in to speak on these questions. We've had recently, for example, people from the Treaty Commission come out and speak to everyone about what that is and what that means. So it's about ongoing professional development and education, and having a training calendar that is updating and including what needs to be accommodated if we find there's a gap, we'll try and fill that gap as best we can. So there's a real interest too, which is good. People are keen to, quite often taking a group out to see an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander art exhibition, for example, is an education sometimes in itself, because the elders will be able to speak at length about many of the symbols and explain some of the artwork, and that's terrific as well. It's sort of training in motion.
And how is it that people that may need your services get connected with your services?
We network out to all of the. We get referrals through, particularly from the hospital services, from Aboriginal housing groups, from community groups. So we've also put regular adverts in the Courier Mail, because we have taken admissions from around Australia. So we use a variety of social media to get the word about.
Do you think that there exists currently a challenge for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people generally to be able to find aged care services?
Yeah, and I don't think we're well enough known either, and we're working on that. But yeah, I definitely do think so. And I think a lot of development and support and training could be provided to younger Aboriginal people if they had a sound base with which to work from. So there's some opportunities there as well, I think.
And do you think the My Aged Care platform is an appropriate entry point?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, no, I think there's some good supports in that funding model. I think we've got some real benefit out of using those. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the say My Aged Care website, do you think that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders would be well equipped to be able to use that?
No. That's not something. It's not something that they'll necessarily. They'll ask, or they'll have conversations within community or within clan or within their networks, and eventually someone may know about it. But no, not at all. And that certainly needs to be more connection there. Maybe even a rollout within the land councils might help, better understanding through those networks. There's elder committees throughout those that could roll out information, but definitely no, they don't. Yep.
And by virtue of the traumatic experiences that you referred to earlier in a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander backgrounds, what are some of the common care needs that arise when they do enter an aged care facility, because of that background?
Certainly I'm seeing in the sort of younger bracket, there's significant issues are usually diabetes. There's a psychiatric demand for support there. Some of our residents will move in and out of more high-need psychiatric care and back in again. The passing of one of our dear ACES residents really upset one of our residents and had to take a spell in. And we have to be aware of those changes in behaviour and talk to see how you're going, what's going on. And then I think maybe, then the clinical care will get involved. So having a good eye for how people are tracking day to day is really important. And helping people understand about being safe, you can come and go when you like, obviously, but maybe it's better to be in, before it gets dark, because some of our residents are quite vulnerable in the hostel and haven't necessarily had a lot of guidance around those issues. And so we try to guide them towards safe practices and safe, although we can't make them, we're not going to make them, but we try to guide them around, keeping safe and so on. And some of those things are new concepts for some of our residents.
And for residents that may have had a history of being in institutions previously, whether it be, homes or incarceration, do you have particular challenges with those residents in how their attitude might be to being in another type of facility?
Yeah, that's a really key question that we are asked about, not being institutionalised, how free am I to come and go? Why do I have to fill out these forms to tell you where I'm going? There's a lot of suspicion around that. We talk through those points and are very clear with our residents around their rights and their flexibilities to come and go as they wish. We're actually increasing opportunities with weekend services and bus services so people take people out and about a bit more. But people are very leery of that point, and it takes, significant discussion. And often people will come into the hostel area and say, I'm going to stay 2 weeks, because they want to have a foot in and a foot out if they don't like it. If they feel like it's going to be institutional. The majority of times people stay on permanently and they're very happy. But we say, yeah, come and stay overnight, a weekend, a week, a fortnight, whatever you're comfortable with, And that works really well people can try it out before they make that final decision. And even if they make that final decision, they can leave, but they need to feel that they're only staying for a weekend if that's what they want to do because of those previous institutional environments.
Yes, and the processes you describe are, obviously quite time intensive from a staffing perspective. Are you aware of whether you have higher numbers of staff for residents than what you might see in a more traditional style aged care facility?
Yeah, we do. Because we have potentially people that are going to, if they're not properly cared for, are going to potentially not be able to manage their pain and talk about self-harming and those sort of things, and get very distressed, for different triggers that might occur, those conversations. I have residents that like to pop into my office every afternoon for a yarn, and I stop and have the yarn because it doesn't matter what else is going on. That's an important conversation to have every day, and I make other things wait to have those conversations and apologise that it's late, everyone's great. They'll give you an extension of time or whatever, but you must take those conversations when they're sought, I believe.
And your facility is located here in Melbourne in Brunswick East.
It is, yeah.
Do you find many of your residents come from this Melbourne region?
Yes, yeah.
And are you able to comment on any observations that you've been able to make about, I guess, the experience of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people that have, grown up in, say, in Melbourne, rather than you know, the experience of someone that might have grown up on their traditional land, say?
I probably haven't been at ASIS long enough to give you an in-depth answer to that. What I have noticed is that people blossom in a safe environment quite rapidly, and quite often residents will come in and they don't want to socialise and they're really scared and they just grab their lunch and run back to their room, and they don't want to go to any of the group's work. And then gradually over time, because everyone's talking and including them and just being, you know, friendly, they come out of the shell more and more, and then they come to you and they say, I want to go to men's club next week. Okay, that sounds good. Do you want someone to walk up with you? It's just the end of the complex, but that's a big step for some people. And then I didn't go this week, but I'm going to go next week. And then eventually they'll get there and they're really proud of themselves. And then next thing they're sitting in the dining room with other people having their meals. And, you know, one resident said, I'm going to sell the big issue now. That was a huge step forward, because when he came in, he just didn't engage at all, and came in and showed me his whole uniform and his satchel, and he was just so proud that he got and went for the interview. And that sort of progress, and wants to learn different skills now, has happened in a really short time. Now, he's not, you know, he's got his issues that we need to look after. I'm not saying it's a fairy tale and it's 100%, but that's significant improvements and improvement in his health and wellbeing and lifestyle in a pretty short time, really.
Yeah. And do you have a sense of what proportion of your residents might come from Melbourne?
I would think at least 70, yeah.
We've touched already on some of the programs and initiatives that your service offers both for residents and the day program people coming in. You mentioned things like the men's shed. And so what does that involve?
That's where there's yarning and macking of artefacts, and the elder male residents go down and share their knowledge and understanding with and also some of the younger Aboriginal male staff go down if they want to, and they make things together and talk, and they have the music on, and it's just a very nice opportunity to teach skills such as boomerang making. I've seen them making boomerangs down there. Not that I'm supposed to be pecking around the corner, but I did. And painting them up. And a part of our new program is all the artwork that's made by our residents and day program people will be on our website, as our new website, and all the money will go back to those artists as an opportunity for them to have some extra money. But it's just a great community environment. The women's group, more recently, we're working with the elders making a possum skin cloak and sharing stories, talking about what different symbols mean and history, their own histories. And that's very sacred ceremony, and we're very privileged to have that shared at ASIS, and it's very much enjoyed.
Yes. And what are some of the other, I guess, measures or practices you put in place that are aimed towards meeting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, you know, cultural needs?
Well, all of the events throughout the year that are calendared for that Australians in general will be aware of, such as Reconciliation and NAIDOC Week. We have a huge community breakfast for NAIDOC Week, and, you know, I think 200 people come through in a very short amount of time. And it's a great opportunity because everyone gets together and shares the celebration with our residents and our staff. We have regular events such as elders coming in, but also younger men are doing it now with the didgeridoo playing. We've started the pet therapy program, which is not particularly cultural but very important to residents with dementia. The therapies are very beneficial. Smoking ceremonies.
And you've also commencing an Indigenous vegetable patch?
Yes, and that's again through our volunteers program. We've got some experts coming in about like land development and so on to set that up. That's going to be developed with Indigenous herbs and spices and different natives, and the residents are very keen to be involved in that and do the oversight. We've spoken with the elders specialist dietitian from the Aboriginal Health Service, and she's fully on board, thinks it's a great idea because we're going to incorporate those traditional herbs and medicines and so on into the menu, and everyone's very excited about that.
And I'm aware you're also looking to set up opportunities for residents to potentially speak about their culture as a way of bringing in money for those residents directly. Could you tell us a little more about that?
I regularly get calls from, I suppose, mainly from parents of children that know me and talk to them, and sort of there's a real demand for the knowledge, and we have the knowledge to share. So we are looking at, and again, we'll establish this through the website and through social media a bit more, but let's share the wealth of knowledge that we have directly with, I would think in the first round, educational services would be great. There's a real thirst for that knowledge. But I have said to people, I would be certainly happy to ask the elders, but I'd like the schools to make a donation to that elder, and they were happy to do that. So that's a really nice synergy, I think, of education and elder knowledge that I think we'll be able to roll out more in 2020.
Yes. And in terms of residential aged care facilities that are not a specialist Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander facility, so say more mainstream for want of a better word, do you think that those types of facilities would be able to provide appropriate care for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders?
No, and I think if that was the only option, Aboriginal people won't seek to be admitted into Western services predominantly, where they've had to be for high needs health issues. We're still getting calls from different families now to have them moved out, and we've got people coming over next week to transfer over to ACES because they're not happy. I think it will create some significant issues if there weren't. There's going to be a considerable spike in demand over the next 10 years for aged care services for Aboriginal people, and there needs to be some really good planning around that, or there will be a real crisis in terms of how people are looked after and where they're looked after. Because even in coming into, as I said earlier, into an Aboriginal organisation such as ACES, people want to be sure that all of those components that we talked about earlier are going to be present. I don't think you can just go and test and organise on a Western nursing home for a couple of days or something, but I just don't believe they would, in the main, opt for that sort of care.
And what do you think the main challenges would be for a mainstream provider to meet Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders' cultural needs?
They would need to have a component of trained Aboriginal staff. They would need to have a training for their general staff, awareness around how the facility is set up, things like discussions are more circular for Aboriginal people. So we're setting up a fire pit at the moment. We're going to have everything around there for yarning sessions, but how the service is planned and designed, there's a long list of items that need to be considered. Artworks and arts and artefacts is just fundamental. I think personally, and I've said to Mick Hoarding, I think it's in Aboriginal people's DNA, the love of arts. And those sort of programs delivered by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are really important. The possum cloak ceremonies with the elders. This is a part of the end of life process. and the tradition and ceremonies that go with that, and the going back on land and the Surrey business that need to be understood that currently are not in place in Western nursing homes.
There's no further questions from any commissioners.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms Lyons, for what you've had to say. It's been very helpful. I'm particularly interested in the intergenerational aspect of what you do. You know, we've had TV programs recently on kids coming in and so on, but you actually have an intergenerational service, and it'd be kind of nice if you could just talk to us about why that works or how that works for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
I think it's been a necessity, but it's a necessity that it's worked very well, because I feel that the younger residents are really benefiting from the interaction and community of the older residents, and the additional oversight and care of the Aboriginal nursing staff and general staff. And I think even the fact that the head of the catering is Aboriginal and wants to do the Indigenous sort of spices and things like that is really important, and that's something the younger residents are very interested in as well. It's kind of it's developed over time, I've noticed. It's a part of working every Wednesday's men's shed. I think that's been and the women's groups is where the different age groups come together and work on projects together and learn about each other. We're doing a big project with Mick Hoarding, which everyone will be involved in, men, women, staff if they want to. That'll be another merging together of the different components of the organisation on a project. And I just see it as being very beneficial for all the parties. And I think our younger residents really enjoy those opportunities of sitting with the elders. And I notice even, you know, the really quite young staff members sitting down and having lunch with the elders and really enjoying those discussions. And it just warms my heart when I see it, to be honest. I just love seeing them all together.
As an outsider, it seems to me like there is a genuine sense of purpose amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders to share and to bring on the younger people. Am I right about that?
Absolutely.
Could you explain that a bit more?
I think it's certainly seen as part of the role of an elder and a recognised elder to guide, support and mentor younger counterparts. And I have heard our elders giving some really good advice to some of the young fellas about different things that they didn't think were too good for them, and to learn from their advice and guide them. And but also in the traditional way, some of our elders work with the Aboriginal children that are in foster care and they take them on camps and like how to survive in the sort of bushland and get back in touch with those kind of grassroots things and build confidence out of those programs. Or, you know, we have elders, residents that work in the Koori courts, and they'll give some of those young people a real talking to about what they need to be doing. Mm-hmm. But it's with a good love and genuine care that it's delivered with, and I think people hear that and that truth in that. And nothing's forced, so you don't have to go up here or you don't have to go there, and you don't have to. So it happens organically, and it's very nice how these relationships grow amongst the different generations.
Thank you. That's very helpful, Ms. Lyons.
Nothing arising, Commissioner.
Lyons, thank you very much for giving your evidence. It's been very informative and very helpful.
Thank you, Your Honour. Thank you.
Commission. Thank you.
I shall go.
You may go.
If it remains a convenient time for the Commission, morning tea break.
Yes, well, it's a few minutes early, but I suppose that might be an assistance to everybody else. So perhaps if we resume at 5 to 11, going to work for everybody else? Right, 5 to 11.
Please be seated.
Sessions?
The next witnesses we will hear evidence from today are both Aboriginal elders. Out of respect for these witnesses and in accordance with their wishes, I will address them both as uncle during their evidence.
Yes, thank you.
The next witnesses we call are Uncle Brian Birch and Uncle Brian Campbell.
Just get you to repeat after me. I solemnly and sincerely
Solemnly and sincerely
declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give
the evidence I shall give
will be
is
the
true
truth.
and correct.
Truth,
Nothing
the
but
whole
the truth.
Nothing but the truth.
I've already read it.
I solemnly and sincerely
You want me up there? Yeah. I repeat after me, I solemnly and sincerely
declare and
say and
affirm
affirm that the evidence I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Yeah.
Uncle Campbell, what is your full name?
I'm William Campbell.
And you're 65 years old?
Yes, I am.
And you currently live at the Aboriginal Community Elders Service?
Yes, I do.
And Uncle Birch,
Yeah.
what's your full name?
Brian Keith Birch.
And you're currently 83 years age?
Yep,
And you also live at the Aboriginal Community Elders Service?
that's right.
Uncle Campbell, how long have you lived at the service for?
At the where I am now?
Yes.
9 weeks.
9 weeks. And you first entered there on a respite basis?
I went there under the domestic violence, elder abuse respite.
Yes. And what were your circumstances?
I was at where I used to live. I was getting bashed on a regular basis by a 20-year-old, and people in the house did not take any reason to look after me. I was just getting abused all the time.
Where was the house that you were living?
Werribee.
Yes. And was that your own personal house or?
Half and half, yeah. Yeah. And the person who would come into my house was with my granddaughter, and he was only a would-be, could-be anyway, as far as I'm concerned. And he's the one who was doing all the abuse.
Yes. And so did you try to look for somewhere else to live before ending up in the aged care service?
As has been pointed out to me many a times when looking for accommodation for elder abuse victims, yeah, especially males, there's nothing. In Victoria, they bring these laws in, and it's not there to cater for males, it's more catering for females under the Domestic Violence Act. So that's the only reason I ended up at ACES.
And did you apply for any other kind of housing?
Oh, they turned around and told me many a porcupines on that. You can apply for this and apply for that, and they turn around and go, when you go to apply for them, they say no. So you end up in places where really, I'm too active for being where I am, but it's the safest place I can be at the moment. So that's how it is.
Do you remember what the other type of housing you applied for
Oh, they
was?
asked me for private housing, public housing, and what was the other one they wanted me to go with? It's a drug and rehab unit in the city here somewhere, and I said, oh yeah, thank you very much. No. So,
Yeah. And when you say they told you to go, was there a particular service that was trying to help you?
yeah, I had VACA, which is part of the elders group in Werribee. My worker, Poe, he's been busting his buns for that. Didn't use the bad words. So, every time I ask him to find something, look for something for me, he goes out of his way to do it. So I'm great appreciated with that. I'm not a great fan of trying to get on public housing. Public housing's 5 years for emergency, yeah, and maybe 10 or 15 years for any normal person. So why, I'm here.
And Uncle Birch,
Yeah.
how long have you been at the
This is
Central Aged Care?
3 years.
3 years? And before you were living in the service, whereabouts did you live?
In Brunswick, yeah.
In Brunswick. And was that in your own home?
No, it's renting a place. Yeah.
Sorry?
It's renting a place?
You were renting a place? Yes. And did you live by yourself?
Yep,
Yes.
I did.
And then you had to go to hospital?
Well, I had a heart operation, you know, and pretty big one. I had to put another valve in, so I said, the doctor, I can't go home, I've got no one to look after me, so he got me a nurse, yeah.
And so the doctor helped to get you in touch
Yeah.
with the residential aged care facility. And was it through the doctor that you became aware of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you said you've been there for 3 years now. Uncle Campbell, you were born at Stradbroke Island.
Yep, I'm
Yes.
a Murray. They call us a Murray.
Yes.
We're Queenslanders.
Yes. And what was your parents' background? Or
My
is your
dad's
parents'
Aboriginal,
background?
my mum's Jewish.
Yes.
I was taken away from them when I was 1 year old, or going on to one, and I didn't see them until I was 15. I was part of the stolen generation, and I have never had that nurturing as a family, and so that's what happens with us. And I think that's the biggest problem I have in life, is that I never had that family connection, but I had family connection with my grandfather at 15. He taught me a few of the Aboriginal things I had to learn. From there on, I just was here.
And is your grandfather still at Stradbroke Island?
No, he is in spirit only. He's not here in what you would call full life.
Yes. Yes. And when you were taken, when you were 1 year old, where were you taken to?
Tufnell home
And how long were you there for?
until I was 9.5.
And then where did you go?
They sent me over to Enoggera Boys Home, and I was there until I was 15.
And what did they tell you about your family
Nothing.
there?
They wouldn't tell us anything. They didn't want to tell us that my father was Aboriginal. We weren't to deal with our language, our culture, or anything like that. And that's why a lot of Aboriginal people committed suicide, because they weren't told about their family. And when they come into aged care, like we'll get back into that aged care side of it, they don't look, most aged care places, I've only met 1, 2 in Victoria what do actually look after Aboriginal people as Aboriginal people, not a number in the system or a figure so they get their money dumped up. And like ACES and the one in Shepparton, they're the only 2 I know what actually look after Aboriginal people with the dignity of an Aboriginal person.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when was it that you were reunited with your family?
I was 15 and Mum and Dad got my sisters out of Tufnell and my little brother, and I was only 15 and a half when I got to know them, and I got to see my first time ever, my family as a family, not as an individual person.
And where did you live then?
We lived in New Farm, of all places,
Yes.
and Clay Street New Farm. Spent 2 years there, and then we moved to Sydney, because we'll move once. The Joe Bjelke-Petersen era let us have that freedom of movement when the federal government handed it down in the referendum that we were allowed to move. That's when we moved, and we pissed off down to Sydney. Sorry, shouldn't use that word. My apologies, Your Honour.
And then when was it that you moved to Melbourne?
Moved to Melbourne when I was nearly 19. Moved to Shepparton, actually, not to Melbourne.
Yes.
You can always notice all the black fellas all lived up in Shepparton. So we had a big family up there. I've got a lot of rallies still living there, and I've got a lot of people who have dealt with all this before. So I've got a really good friend called Uncle Roy. He's from that area, and me and him talk about it all the time, about our issues in life. And he's in home care, so or resi care or aged care, what you like to call it. And he's happy where he is. It's up with the Aboriginal community. So it's a connection he has, and it's a connection I'm having where I am at the moment.
Yes.
So I'm feeling a lot safer there.
Yes. And Uncle Birch, you grew up in Fitzroy.
Yep.
And what was that like?
I loved it.
Loved it. And did you have any siblings?
Yeah, 5.
5.
I got married when I was 17, and girl was 15, had 5 kids with her, yeah.
Yes. And then later in life you got married again?
Yeah, I got married again. I went to Mildura to work up there, and I met a girl at church, and I married Lorraine at 34 years I was married, and she died 10 years ago, yeah. She had MS when I met her, yeah.
Yes. And did you know what your parents' background was growing up?
Oh, my mother was Koori. My father was a bad man, you know. Give him the guns, but he left when I was 3-year-old, yeah.
He left when you were 3 years old.
Yeah.
And did you know growing up that your mother was Koori?
Oh, well, yeah, I wasn't sure at the time because actually I was up Fitzroy, and when I was 30, he said this older Bobby Lovely. He said we come from the Yarra tribe. I didn't know.
You found that out when you were 37?
Yeah.
That you were from the Yarra tribe?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And before that you weren't aware of that part of your history?
Wasn't sure, yeah.
Yeah. And why do you think it was that wasn't something that was spoken about when you were growing up?
I don't know, really. Don't know. My mum protected us all, either.
Yeah.
And at the time, all the Aboriginal people, the welfare came out, and she tried to make it take it away, but
The welfare would come out and she was worried
check
they'd
it,
take you away?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. And so you said she'd hide you?
yeah.
Yes. And how did you found out about living at the Aboriginal Community Elders Service through the doctor at the hospital?
That's right, yeah.
And how do you find it at where you are now?
Love it.
Love it. What do you like about it?
It's very relaxing, you know, it's good, yeah.
Yes.
Not a lot of people there, and it's got a room on my own, and I really like it, yeah.
Mm. And you're an artist, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. You like to paint? Yeah. And you can do that at the
Yeah, places,
service?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to NMIT College 10 years ago, and I learned to paint and won a few awards, and, you know. I got to paint in the National Gallery, yeah.
Yes.
I don't paint for money, just enjoy it, yeah.
Yes. And do they help you get your paint supplies and?
Yeah, I got the money, I buy them, but there's a lady, Sue, she comes in and helps me, and yeah.
Yes. And Uncle Campbell, how do you find living at ACES?
Well, like I said earlier on, it feels really safe. And I made a comment yesterday to a trainer what comes in every so often to train up the staff. I said, what do you think of the place? And they said, it looks like a big family. I said, that's what it's meant to be like as an Aboriginal community. You are a family within themselves. You might have difference of opinion, but we still are a family. And that's the biggest thing what I like there. Plus, you get fed well. Like all black fellas, if you don't feed us, we don't go anywhere.
What kind of food did they give you there?
Ambiguous?
What kind of food do you get?
Oh, well, today is fish and hamburgers. It's Friday, yeah. And you get fruit salad or salad or on it. And, you know, you get food. Every day is a different meal.
Yes.
And Wednesday's bacon and egg day. Everybody comes in for bacon and eggs. So that's one thing we look forward to on a Wednesday.
I don't eat bacon.
No. But that's what they call it, bacon egg Wednesday.
Yeah. Do you like the food, Uncle Birch?
Oh, I'm a small eater, and most I do like it. I can't eat meat much, and because I can't digest it. But when they have fish, I love it, yeah. They're good cooks up there, yeah. Yeah, I like soup.
Yeah.
That's with the vegetables in it, I like that, yeah.
Yeah. And do the staff know what types of things you can and can't
Yeah,
eat?
because they come out and ask you what you want, yeah.
They ask you what they want. Is there usually some options available?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think of the staff at the facility?
Oh, it's good, it's pretty good, yeah. It could be improved, you know, because it's a lot of girls, nurses' aides, and they're Indian, but they're good, most of them are good, but they can be improved, I'm sure. Yeah. Yep.
And what type of improvements are you thinking of?
Probably the nursing, particularly. There's one girl, she's an Indian, and she's excellent.
What is it that you like about her?
Oh, she's sufficient. Just watching more, introduce something for her, she's really good, yeah. Yeah.
How do you find the staff, Uncle Campbell?
Well, I find them friendly and culturally safe, and they understand our needs. There is a couple what you know they're young and they're still learning, but they still respect us as elders and as Aboriginal people. They don't stop learning from us, and we don't stop teaching them. So that's the best way they like doing it. They actually ask you questions, if this is going to be all right for you, and you go yes or no. That's how it is with them.
And do you have the feeling the staff has enough time to spend with you?
Well, yeah, in some contexts it would be, but not in all. Okay, so like if you want to go out for the day, you have to plan it like everywhere. You have to plan ahead, and sometimes it can be changed. It has changed, circumstances change it, so that makes their job a little bit harder. Then they've got to change things around. So you know, it's like it's one of those things where you've got to be just aware of what you're doing with them.
Yes, yes. And what are some other things, Uncle Birch, that they do at the facility that make you enjoy it so much?
Really, it can be improved. You know? I can't say much.
Okay.
It is a good place, but need to be more staff and more activities, and go together as a group, and it can be improved a lot. You know. Yeah.
Are there any activities that you do besides the painting?
No.
Uncle Campbell, do you get involved in any of the activities that are on offer?
When I'm not doing anything, I go up with the pad group, which is upstairs, up in the kitchen area, and I hang around there or go to the men's shed on Wednesday to do crafts. But apart from that, no, I try not to, because that takes time away from the others what need it, where I'm active enough to be able to go out on my own and do all that, where some of the clientele are not active enough to do that, and they're trying to get them to become active, so you give them more time with them.
Sure. And what is the PAD group?
That's the, what do I call it? It's called PAD. It's for Planned Activity Group. Yeah, so that's what it is. It's a concept that was brought in around about 4 years ago, I think, that it was to be for activities for elders and our older people. And for Aboriginal people, it was a kick in the guts until, use that word again, a kick in the stomach when that wasn't brought in for them. So they actually did it in 3 years after, a year after the original one started. So it only takes a year after, a bit long for most places to organise people, especially Aboriginal people. Yeah.
And as one of the younger people that that would be residing at the facility,
That's nice.
how do you find that experience?
I find it because I'm learning from some people what have experienced life as well as what I have. I find the camaraderie amongst us all is very good because we're so connected with our culture, with ourselves as well. And a lot of people, some people get a bit moody, but that's understandable. But the quality of life there is better for them than they would have been if they were in mainstream. Their quality is there, it is a lot better in that sense, where you have your quality of life is improved when you're there, not sitting in a corner and just sit there all day and just do nothing.
Would you feel comfortable being in a non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander specific
No way.
facility? And why is that?
Because I've got my parents who live in one accommodation place where it's aged care. I wouldn't even send my dog to it. I wouldn't even feed my dog there. My dog would reject it. So I would be bitten by my dog if I sent them to that place.
Because of the poor quality of the food there?
Quality, staff, what else could I put down? There's the food quality. Well, if you get a little bowl that much of food on a plate and they said that's your main course, see ya. And like my parents needed constant care with them because my dad's in a princess chair. And one episode there when I went there, he wanted to go to the toilet. And they said, we'll get to him when we can. And he had to sort himself before they could take him to his toilet to change him. So my mum was the same. She's in a wheelchair because they wouldn't give her enough exercise to keep going. So she's in a wheelchair. I'm very, very angry about it, but I have to put up with that because 5 years they've been there, and in that 5 years I've seen my parents deteriorate that quick. It's not funny.
And in terms of that facility's ability to meet your father's particular cultural needs?
They do not. It took me and my little brother a a good 3 years to knock them over the head and tell them what an Aboriginal person is. And that's just getting them to understand what we are, who they are and what their needs are.
And what were the types of things you were trying to explain to them?
The cultural aspect about how he needs to be treated respectfully, not treated as a number and we'll get to you when we can, type of thing. And my dad was a very proud Aboriginal man, and my mum's a very proud woman, and like it's just deteriorated their confidence. And Dad doesn't really want to go out the front door anymore. He hasn't been out that front door of that place for 5 years. My mum hasn't either. So you can tell we've now got the idea they're institutionalised, which is really wrong. But again, that's that particular place. Okay.
And what do you see as the main differences between where they are and the kind of service and care that you're receiving where you are?
Well, where they are, they only get there as a number, and they're a number to a corporate body, and the corporate bodies don't care. They're only there for the money, whoopee, but they don't care for the quality of life. Where we are here, we've got a small amount at the moment, but the staff they look after the quality of life what we have. It's very important that happens with our elderly people, and some of the institutions some of the aged care units, places I've seen, there's not too many out there that would look after anybody with any empathy. How's that for you? Is that a good word today? So, there's one I know really close to where I used to live, and it never, ever took anybody out, did anything with them. And they were all there sitting there waiting to die. That's all it was. And so the one where my parents are, all they do is sit there all day, either watch TV or sit on a couch and just wait to die. And that's not my parents, and I don't like that. But again, what can I do about it? There's nothing.
And Uncle Birch, do you think that you would be comfortable in an aged care facility that's not specialised for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders?
I wouldn't be.
No? Why is that?
I just feel I love it there, where I am, and I get upset if I get to go somewhere else. Yeah.
Sorry, I
I'd
didn't
get upset if I had to live somewhere else.
You'd get upset if you had to live somewhere else.
Yeah.
Do you think that you'll stay where you are now?
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Yes. And what about you, Uncle Campbell? Do you think you'd stay where you are, or would you like to leave?
Well, I'm, like I said once before, I'm very active in my own mind and in my physical activity. I would love to be back on independent living, but I wouldn't like to be independent living in Victoria. But everybody wants to go home to country, but that's one thing I would love to see, but that's not going to happen in a hurry. So, I would stay there as long as I can, because I'm feeling safe there. And that's the main thing for me is safety. And I have my independence as well there, so it's not as all cut and dry like most places are.
And do you still feel a connection to Stradbroke Island?
I always will. I've been up there nearly 3 years ago now. Walked back on country and I upset a few people on the ferry when I went across. I stripped down to my undies and walked on land. And everybody just looked at me with a stupid look. What's this fella doing? And I felt really comfortable when I walked on country. And all my spirits come back and haunted me and told me I should have been in there ages ago. So, that's something what non-Aboriginal people cannot understand, what the spirit does to you and how you feel.
And so eventually would you like to return
That's my
there?
bucket list, yes. Yes. That'll be the last place I go.
And Uncle Birch, with your upbringing in the Melbourne kind of urban environment, do you have a similar kind of connection to land or country?
No, I never lived in the country much, Maybe when I went to Mildura, but I love it where I am. I like the city, and the only thing about the Ace is that I think it's unfair. We don't get taken out very often. I like to go once a month and buy some clothes, but it doesn't happen. There's no one to take you out.
Yes.
I've been saying this for about 3 years, and it doesn't happen. I think that's unfair. I really do. Yeah.
Yes. So you'd like the opportunity to be taken out of the facility more often?
Yeah, if it's shopping or something like that.
Yeah. And did you say that only happens about once a month at the moment?
You're lucky. Yeah. There's no one to do it, but no one to take you out. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions, Commissioners.
If I may, It's we really appreciate you giving your evidence, and I must say, throughout the year the Royal Commission's been running, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been very generous in sharing with us your views, and I think we've learnt a lot, and I hope we can do something constructive to support what you want to happen. One of the things that we have heard a lot about is connection to family, and you've both spoken very eloquently about that. But what you were talking about just then, Uncle Brian, was Birch, I should say, is the need to get out more and so on. Can you talk to us a little more about what you would like to do? You mentioned shopping. What are the other kinds of things?
Well, I like clothes, you know, and I had to go somewhere buy some nice clothes and we have a coffee in it, and it doesn't happen. There's who's going to take us out? No one. I'm not allowed to go out on their own, fair enough, and there's no one else to take us out. I think that's really unfair, I do. Yeah.
And if you, what's stopping you going out on your own?
Not allowed to. It's for girls, huh? Yeah. I couldn't go out on my own anyway because I'm in a wheelchair, and
Right.
so I don't know. It's pretty poor. I really do believe that. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
No, thanks.
Uncle Birch and Uncle Campbell, thank you both very much for coming and sharing your stories. I know that some of it is difficult perhaps to relay, and it's really important for the Commission, for the government and for the entire community to hear the stories that you've told us. Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me, could I ask one question to the...
Of course you can.
Yeah. Question, I've sat with the Royal Commission into deaths in custody. I've sat with the bringing them home hearing, right? And out of all of them, hardly anything gets done. Is this one going to be the same?
Well, I certainly hope this is one that does get something done. That's our intention, that something gets done, and that's why we're gathering your stories and the stories of others.
Well, deaths in custody, I had 50 recommendations, and only 3 of them actually been and that's over 10 years ago.
Yeah, I'm pleased you've asked the question, Uncle Campbell, and we might put that in the report when it comes out, the need for something to be done, and that people like you come to these commissions to share your stories so that something gets done.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
That's it.
Ms. Begum will call the next witness.
Yes, thank you.
These witnesses be excused.
No, take the brakes off. Yeah, the one too, yeah.
Reckless driver, they don't let me operate cars. No, I'm stuck.
You're putting the brakes on, that's
Oh, that's why. Oh, yeah,
Yeah, that's
that's why I don't have to drive.
Oh, that's dangerous if you were.
Oh, yeah. I've got an instructor.
I call Jacqueline and Michael.
Repeat after me. I solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give will be the truth, nothing but the truth, and the whole truth.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Michael.
Good morning, Ms. Michael.
Good morning.
What is your full name?
Jacqueline and Michael.
Have you prepared a statement for the Royal Commission?
I have.
Is there a copy of your statement there on the desk in front of you?
There is.
Do you have any amendments to your statement?
I don't.
Is it true and correct to the best of your information and belief?
Yes, it is.
I tender the statement of Jacqueline and Michael dated the 26th of September 2019.
Yes, thank you. The statement of Jacqueline and Michael of the 26th of September 2019 will be exhibit 1027.
Ms Michael, you're the Diversity Manager at Bolton Clark.
That's correct.
Bolton Clark is a trading name for RSL Care, Royal District Nursing Home and RDNS Home Care, is that right?
That's correct.
You worked for RDNS as a Cultural Liaison Coordinator from 1999 until 2009?
That's correct.
And then you transitioned to Bolton Clark?
I worked as the Diversity Manager for Royal District Nursing Service from 2009 to 2016. At that time, there was a merger between Royal District Nursing Service and RSL Care, and from 2016 up until now, I am the Diversity Manager for Bolton Clark.
Thank you, Ms Michael. You led the development of a cultural diversity framework?
Yes, back in 1999, yes.
And that's been published in 3 versions?
That's correct.
In 2000, 2012 and most recently in the framework for 2017 to 2025?
That's correct.
Commissioners, that document is in the general tender bundle. Bolton Clark provides a range of aged care services in various states and territories.
That's correct.
Could you please describe them for the Commission?
Bolton Clark is one of Australia's one of the largest and most experienced aged care providers. We're a not-for-profit provider. In Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania, we provide Commonwealth Home Support Program. In Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria, we have home care packages. And in Queensland and New South Wales, we provide residential aged care services. We also provide retirement living in Queensland and New South Wales.
Yes, and Bolton Clark CHSP program includes a community nursing program with a focus on homeless people, is that right?
That's correct.
And that's integrated with its HIV/AIDS program?
Yes.
Bolton Clark has taken the step, as you said, of developing its own diversity framework, which was led by you starting in 1999. Why was this important?
When you have a geographically dispersed organisation and workers working in people's homes and in different environments, in order to understand and have shared values for diversity, we at the time decided that we needed an organisational strategy that would support all our workers with understanding and responding to the diverse care needs and choices of care recipients. And so a structured strategy like the diversity framework that looks at establishing policy and practices to enable greater diversity and equity was required. Mm-hmm. And it was also a result of implementing the Australian Government Department of Health Aged Care Diversity Framework, so it's our way of operationalising that.
Yes. Operator, could you please bring up paragraph 22A of Ms Michael's statement? This paragraph contains Bolton Clark's own definition of diversity, which is obviously different to the definition of special needs in the Aged Care Act. Could you please explain why Bolton Clark has taken a broader approach?
We commenced work on this, on developing a definition back in 2013 when, with an extensive literature review, we could not find a definition that was applicable to the aged care system and to our care recipients. We've together with the literature review and a range of other research methodologies, including focus groups with our staff and in-depth interviews with our staff, and also external organisations such as called LGBTI and Aboriginal
community-controlled organisations and their representatives, we looked to pull together a definition, as you say, a broad definition that encompasses difference, but also encompasses connection. And so that definition that is now adopted across Bolton Clark does that. It presents to our workforce the notions that diversity does differentiate, but that diversity does also connect people.
Ms. Michael, the diversity conceptual model is one component of Bolton Clark's diversity framework, as I understand it.
That's correct.
Operator, could you please bring up figure 1, which is just directly above paragraph 29? So as I understand it, in this diagram, there's a list of diversity characteristics, and again, that list includes characteristics that fall outside the special needs definition in the Aged Care Act. Is it your view that diversity categories should remain open?
The diversity conceptual model does mention and include those people under the Special Needs Act, and it needs that protection. We've also gone outside the Aged Care Act and addressed issues such as the work from the World Health Organisation on the social determinants of health, and also the work of the Australian Human Rights Commission, so there's human rights dispersed. And we've done that intentionally, and we believe through discussions with our workforce and other representatives that we do need to go outside.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just taking one example, gender is included as a diversity characteristic in your diversity conceptual model. How does gender remain relevant in considering a client's care needs as they age?
So we've included gender as a possible diversity characteristic that can create disadvantage. There are patterns in health for specific genders that are much more prevalent, and our staff and our workers need to understand that. We know that women live longer than men. We know that women access services more readily than men, but on the other hand, there are some patterns that are also disadvantaging women, and also we take into account gender diversity and identification outside those two genders to allow for people to self-identify according to their gender. So that alone is a very big concept that our workforce needs to understand.
Yes, and Ms. Michael, is gender also relevant to the delivery of care to Bolton Clark's clients? For example, is it the case that some clients may prefer to receive care from staff of the same gender?
Yes, absolutely. And it is very important for us to meet that need as much as possible, because if we don't, people may refuse our service, and that's the reality.
Does Bolton Clark aim to treat diversity as part of its usual business?
Yes, we do.
And why is that?
The ultimate reason and the most important reason for looking at diversity as business as usual is that ultimately it benefits our care recipients. So our care recipients, we look to ensure that they receive the services and care that they need in the way that is most important to them. And that would be the biggest benefit of diversity.
Ms. Michael, I read that one of the components of Bolton Clark's diversity framework is partnering with consumers for diversity. Could you please explain how this operates in practice?
This is a model that we've developed, used, implemented for a number of years now in a range of service and product design. It's a set of processes that support the notion of learning from our consumers to make sure that the way in which we develop our products, for instance, are relevant to those people.
Okay. We heard earlier evidence earlier in this week about the Victorian Access and Support Program. Have you heard of that program?
I have.
Of it? And how do you utilise that program at Bolton Clark?
From my knowledge, we work and interface with the Access and Support Service in two ways. One is entry into MAC or navigation support into MAC, and then into Bolton Clark for care recipients who are quite vulnerable and not able to do that on their own. And on the other hand, we, as a diversity team, so I have a small team of diversity coordinators, we are part of the Access and Support Network, so are aware of all the access and support workers out there, so that when a Bolton Clark staff member, whether it's a nurse or a case manager, identifies that one of our existing care recipients needs support and is quite vulnerable and needs to get back into MAC to be reassessed, then the diversity team will support that staff member to support, to bring in the access and support worker to assist the care recipient with that.
Yes. What are the indicators that a client might need that access to that particular program?
So with people of special needs, sometimes they may not disclose or share information with us about their safety or about their risks. Our workforce is highly trained to identify some of those, and even though we know that the person requires more services and more care, they may actually, for many, many different reasons, not accept care. In one instance, it may be that the nurse wants to support that client to get back into MAC, to get them onto a home care package. Let's say it's a nursing service through Commonwealth Home Support Program, but the nurse has identified that the client really needs a case manager to support them with a number of different services, but is only accepting nursing. With time limitations on a CHSP nurse, the opportunity to bring in an access and support worker who speaks the person's language and understands their culture, who can elicit maybe hidden safety and risk issues, is of enormous support. So the Bolton Clark staff member, even though not knowing some of the hidden risks, understands that there are risks, so then is able to bring that access and support specialist in.
Yes, and you mentioned that time is a consideration because particularly under the delivery of CHSP services there are time limitations on staff. Are you aware how much time an access and support program worker might typically spend with a client?
From my knowledge, they are dealing with the most vulnerable people in the aged care system, and I hear that they're spending considerable time, and it does take time to explain the aged care system, the role of MAC, and also the different funding programs to individuals in order for them to make informed decisions. So from my understanding, it takes quite a lot of time, but I don't know exactly how long. Yeah.
Sure. And what characteristics make the client group that you're talking about vulnerable?
It's those clients who have multiple diversity characteristics, so multiple situations and conditions that make it difficult for them to participate in their care. We go to the diversity conceptual model to identify all those diversity characteristics, and they are the most vulnerable people
Thank you, Ms Michael. Now, at paragraph 35B of your statement, you say that at Bolton Clark all policies and procedures are written and underpinned by reference to diversity. They are universally applicable to all populations. Does this mean that policies at Bolton Clark are not broken down into individualised special needs groups? And is that an effective model?
Generally speaking, yes, it does mean that. But where we have a very dedicated legislation, we may have a policy for specific populations. So, for instance, we do have a dedicated policy on valuing carers in recognition of the Carer Recognition Act. But generally speaking, our policies are applicable to all people. And we try wherever possible to ensure that the position within the policy is universally applicable.
Yes, and as I understand it, your staff receive training on policies and procedures on commencement of their employment with Bolton Clark.
Yeah.
Can diversity be trained?
Yes, I believe it can. And we use a number of strategies, models and processes to do that. I don't think there's one way of doing it. I think you need a gamut of strategies. One is policies. Having the policies in place to guide your workforce is very important. We use the definition of diversity so that we have a shared understanding and a shared value across our organisation. The diversity conceptual model supports training and is used as a visual. So sometimes it's really difficult to list groups with special needs and conditions and situations because it can become very long. So we intentionally have the diversity conceptual model as a visual for people to look at and think, wow, is that how big diversity is? And yes, it is. We look to have a culturally competent workforce, a workforce that has the skills and knowledge to be able to work with all people. On an education, from an education perspective, so there is formal training, but from an education perspective, we encourage our staff to acquire knowledge. So we call that cultural knowledge, and we learn from our care recipients about what is important to them, and then we encourage our staff to take that knowledge and apply it to the next situation. So it's about building their knowledge, it's about building their awareness. Cultural experience is really important, and we say to staff, use every moment as a learning opportunity because diversity is a lifelong learning. We will never know everything about everybody, and being culturally competent and being able to elicit that knowledge is really important. Of course, the diversity team is available as an educative tool as well, and we get calls from our staff on a daily basis to assist them with problem solving.
Yes, and you set out at paragraph 42 the education that Bolton Clark does to help employees understand and develop their skills in this area. In recruitment, what factors or indicators or qualities do you look for in potential staff in assessing their aptitude for training in this regard?
From an organisational capability and capacity perspective, we do want a culturally and diverse, linguistically diverse workforce that can provide culturally appropriate and safe care to people. We have, in the recruitment process, in all job advertisements, regardless of function and role, we have a very discreet statement on valuing diversity and the benefits that brings to care recipients. We also look for and try to maximise the use of the language skills of our workforce. And so for all direct care job advertisements, we do have a second statement encouraging candidates who speak a language other than English to join Bolton Clark. So they're two of the most effective ways, we believe.
Yes. What costs are involved in, for example, in a broad sense, not in necessarily a dollar sense, in the education and training that you do of staff to implement the diversity framework?
We have a number of strategies in-house to meet that, and there is a cost associated with that. It is quite resource intensive. We work closely with a range of departments, such as our Human Resource Department that has the Learning and Development team there to look at developing products such as our Code of Conduct that all employees complete on commencing with Bolton Clark that has elements of diversity embedded throughout that. We've also invested in for all care staff, a very dedicated package on working with diversity as an introduction. The training of our managers, which is really important to us because the diversity team lead diversity, but it's our managers and leaders who drive it throughout the organisation. So we've invested in the training of our managers to support them to implement and evaluate their diversity action plans, and we have 48 of those. Of course, there is investment when staff can self-identify their training needs. Depending on where staff are working, in what area, what catchment, they may need specific training for a particular population group because they're seeing more of that group. So to build up their cultural competence, we will invest for them to attend training outside the organisation by other organisations such as ethnic organisations or Aboriginal community controlled organisations. There's an example, if I may give you one.
Yes, please do.
In Queensland recently, our Toowoomba site manager felt that her staff needed training on cross-cultural communication and was able to bring in training from an organisation called Diversity Care. So we have those relationships and the diversity team facilitates those relationships.
Yes, you mentioned that managers get special training and that you have 48 diversity action plans. Do you have an action plan for each facility?
Yes, we do.
And how do they differ from one to the next?
So another investment is with parts of our business to support us to build the diversity action plans. They're electronic platforms on our shared systems at Bolton Clark. So the format is similar. We use the 6 outcomes for consumers from the Department of Health Aged Care Diversity Framework and the 4 action plans that sit under that. We did some very in-depth analysis of what's contained in the aged care diversity framework and the action plans to ensure that we encapsulate the messages and look to operationalise it to meet the care recipients that we care for. So we use the 6 outcomes. Then managers are trained to look to actions for their sites that meet the diverse needs of their care recipients, their workforce, and even potential customers. And these are measurable actions that they can collect outcomes and evidence against. So managers are responsible for their action plans and they document everything electronically.
Yes, and in a practical sense, what would be an example of an action plan that might be appropriate, for example, in North Queensland that might not be so appropriate in the CBD in Melbourne? Are there regional differences?
Yes, there are. So I was recently working with the manager in Cairns and her needs and the needs of her care recipients and workforce are very different to ours. In that instance, there are no, as an example, there is no access and support program out there. So the challenge for that manager and the workforce is to look at other ways of getting information to her staff and to support care recipients. So the diversity team is active in trying to facilitate that need.
Yes, and if there's, say, for example, a very vulnerable client along the lines of your description before with multiple diverse needs and perhaps health vulnerabilities as well in Queensland, how do you fill that gap where there's no access and support program?
It's very challenging, and having an access and support program across Australia would be very beneficial for our care recipients. At the moment, we struggle with that, so it's about identifying the service systems that are available in the community, and I must say that that's where the biggest gap is, because sometimes we can't find those supports.
So then there are unmet needs?
So the diversity team will support them as much as possible to source that type of support, but where that is not possible and that service is not available, our staff, our workforce will look to support that care recipient as much as is possible under the circumstances, but there may be unmet needs, yes.
Sure. Ms. Michael, just turning to the topic of interpreters and interpreting services that you offer at Bolton Clark, could I ask your operator to please bring up paragraph 71E of the statement? So I note that Bolton Clark has a national language line or telephone interpreter system for care recipients, and that's something that's funded by Bolton Clark?
Yes, it is. It's a telephone interpreter service that consumers can access when they need it.
And that includes both your home care clients as well as your residential care clients?
It includes all care recipients and even potential customers.
Yes, and who pays for the cost of the interpreting service?
Bolton Clark does.
So, for example, if I'm a home care package recipient level 3 and I speak English, but as I've got older, I've got dementia and I've reverted to my my first language, can I use the interpreting service without dipping into my home care package funds?
Yes, you can.
And how long has this line been operational for?
It's been in operation, so it started off in the Victorian part of our business, and then we, as a result of some evaluation and some improvement, we found that people in other states across Bolton Clark catchments also wanted to access it, and they were being disadvantaged because they were charged STD rates, calling from Sydney, for instance. So in about 2013, we expanded it and it became the national language line.
Yes. When you say it at paragraph 57, operator, if you could please bring up paragraph 57, you say that there were approximately 4,000 instances of interpreters used across Bolton Clark's aged care services. Is this a reference to the in-house interpreting service?
We don't have an in-house interpreting service. We have supply agreements with 2 interpreter services or suppliers, but we also access interpreters through TIS National, which is the preferred provider for the aged care system.
I see. So the Bolton Clark National Language Line is provided by Bolton Clark through service agreements with interpreting services?
That's right, with a company called Fitz Language Loop.
Yes, thank you. And it's a free service for Bolton Clark clients regardless of the type of care they receive?
That's correct.
In your statement, you note at paragraph 105C that following the announcement of TIS as providing interpreters for the aged care program, an analysis was done of the availability of interpreters. Was that analysis done by Bolton Clark?
It was done by Bolton Clark, but we meet with TIS National regularly, probably on a monthly basis now, to understand the data.
And you say that a conclusion was drawn that reveals a high number of cancellations by TIS because of a lack of interpreters in high demand languages or dialects.
That's correct.
Why would there, why on that example, for example, booking an Italian interpreter, who was making the booking for the interpreter?
So we use an online portal. Our staff all have access to that online portal with their codes and passwords, and so our staff book those interpreters.
Yes, and they presumably book them, the interpreters, because there's a client with care needs and speaks a language other than English as a first language. So
That's
what is the
correct.
consequence for the client of the interpreting service being cancelled?
The challenge for Bolton Clark in many situations where an interpreter is seen as critical to the admission, for instance, or the assessment, is that if we don't get an interpreter to allow and enable that effective two-way communication, we will not understand their needs. So I do have an instance where, CHSP clients are waiting for long periods of time in order for their admission and their assessment visit to be taken. So clients can be put at risk.
Yes, and do you know offhand what sort of, or do you know from your experience what services they were waiting for?
Nursing services mostly.
At nursing services in the home?
In the home, yes.
Do you consider that to be potentially a health risk?
Yes, I do.
And does this show one way in which deficient communication can be a health risk to a potentially vulnerable client?
Yes, it does.
Can it precipitate early entry to residential care?
Yes, it can.
And how common is that in your experience?
Anecdotally, this is a new service that's been listed as the preferred provider of aged care very recently, 3 months. Before that, we also had more localised interpreter services, so we didn't see this cancellation rate at the rate that we're seeing it now. But I think that waiting for effective communication, waiting and Bolton Clark not being able to step in a timely way to understand needs and respond quickly can lead and has led to premature from anecdotes that I hear from our staff. I haven't seen actual data.
Yes.
Could I perhaps just ask a question around that, please? Yes. Given the time frame, if you are assigned a package, and you're normally supposed to get the package organised so that it can deliver within a certain period of time. So what you're saying is that the absence of interpreter services that might help a person work through the nature of that package and so on and form a relationship with the care provider is such that they might miss out entirely on their place in the prioritisation queue and end up in residential care as a result.
That could happen, yes.
Well, that's very disturbing. Very disturbing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Michael. Also on the topic of communication, you refer at paragraph 106E to use of Auslan interpreters, and you note that funding is not provided for Auslan interpreters by the Department of Health for people trying to access aged care services who have a hearing impairment. Is it important, or why is it important that interpreters are provided by DOH to assist people who may have a hearing impairment, and that sign languages are treated in the same way as other languages?
It's crucial to understand a person's needs and to deliver the care that they need. So for care planning and for service delivery, we need that sign language interpreter at that admission and assessment period, because that is critical to service delivery. At the moment, the National Auslan Interpreter Booking and Payment Service is available to our nurses, so those clients that are receiving nursing services, because it's deemed as medical. But recent attempts by our staff to access sign language interpreters through NABs, funded interpreters, for home care package clients via a case manager is not funded. And of course, we would not further disadvantage that client by paying for that sign language interpreter through their budget. So it's another investment for our organisation.
Do you know why a line has been drawn between the funding of foreign languages and the funding of sign languages in this way?
With the reforms, I just don't believe it's been seen as a gap nor addressed. I think it's something that needs to be looked at immediately.
Yes. And with reference to the example we talked about earlier, communication can potentially delay access to aged care services.
Yes.
And accordingly, would you draw the same conclusion about a lack of access to Auslan interpreters being potentially a safety risk?
Yes.
Yes. Now, also on the topic of care needs, you explain that cultural influences can affect a person's understanding of illness.
Mm-hmm.
Could you please provide some examples and explain why that's the case? I'm referring to paragraph 78 of your statement.
Very briefly.
Yes.
Culture impacts on health beliefs, and that's the notion that's presented in our diversity conceptual model as a central diversity characteristic. Whether it's an individual culture or as part of a group or community culture, and sometimes it's implicit and other times it's explicit. We don't understand our behaviour. But there is a lot of evidence to suggest that this connection is vital to understanding health behaviour of care recipients. There is literature on the fact that culture impacts on a person's perception of disease and the causation and how that disease is caused, or that illness, on culture impacts on the way people behave and seek treatment, and also what treatment they accept. So it's important for an aged care system to understand that.
Yes, and perhaps it's most helpful if I direct the Commissioners to the diversity framework and the 9 diversity stories that you've got at the back of the framework for further examples.
Yes.
Finally, on the question of obstacles, or perhaps not quite finally,
Okay.
You say that providing aged care services to a diverse population is resource intensive, and you said that earlier in your evidence today. Can you please explain how Bolton Clark reconciles providing this resource intensive service with operating the business in a commercial way?
So the investment from Bolton Clark far exceeds the funding that we get for the diversity program. We are then left to invest further. We do look at other strategies, so we do seek funding outside the aged care system for the development of products, for instance. We do go to philanthropic trusts for funding. We also look to a training solution and provide our managers with training, again an investment for Bolton Clark, outside funding, so that we do take them out of their regular roles, but we look to managers to equip them with skills and knowledge so that they can drive diversity across our organisation and lead it. And there are train-the-trainer packages to enable them to do that. We also address that through greater use of technology. So we have 7 digital diversity stories on dementia, diabetes and medicines available on our website that our staff use with their care recipients.
Yes. Turning to paragraph 88 of your statement, you note that there are general difficulties in taking the action plans published under the Aged Care Diversity Framework from government policy into something that can be operationalised, implemented and maintained across the organisation. Why is this?
The way in which the Australian Government Department of Health Diversity Action Plan and the 4 action plans that sit under that, the way in which they're designed is at a very high level, and that is helpful. And we've used those very high-level statements, such as the principles and the outcomes for consumers. But in order to do that, you need dedicated resources. You need diversity specialists to analyse the information, to work with other parts of the business to operationalise that. It's not in a format that you can just take and operationalise. It's meant quite a bit of work at Bolton Clark by the diversity team, but also project managers, information management services, and other teams to get that theoretical information that's in the aged care diversity framework and the action plans into a format that can be operationalised and embedded into existing systems of an organisation. So it's quite systemic, and we need to go through quite rigorous processes to support the organisation to operationalise and implement that.
Yes, thank you, Ms Michael. Now finally, you offer a number of solutions or areas for change or reform at paragraph 106 of your statement. It seems to me that the first, at least 4 of those topics relate to workforce.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
That's correct.
How central is the workforce issue, in your view, in successfully servicing clients' diverse needs?
I think it's probably one of the most important factors for providing and to care recipients and to meeting their needs. We need a workforce that is culturally competent, a workforce that receives the training that they need and receives that training in an ongoing way to ensure that they are capable, that the system is capable to meet the needs of a very diverse care recipient population that we have.
Yes. Thank you, Ms Michael. I have no further questions, Commissioners.
I just want to ask you a couple of things about the diversity characteristic chart and how the process that you embarked upon to work out what you were going to put in it. How did you come up with the...
Commissioner, I didn't hear the first sentence. Which document?
I'm thinking of the chart, you know, that the
diversity conceptual model.
Yep, that's what I meant, the diversity conceptual model. As I was looking at it whilst you were giving your evidence and looking at the words that had been chosen to put within it, I wondered what the process was that had been undertaken to decide what went in and what didn't go in.
Thank you for that question. The diversity conceptual model was designed as part of a research study dating back to 2013. Work on that was informed by a literature review And so there were three sources of information that contributed and informed the initial design of the model. We had the 9 special needs groups from the Aged Care Act, the World Health Organisation's work on the social determinants of health elements in there, and also a human rights approach was also used, and components of that. We then took that first iteration of the model and put it through some rigorous research methodology, including focus groups with our own staff and external organisations, to find out from the people who are working with these populations as to what are the common and shared diversity characteristics of older people. And we came up with cultural identity as the core, and we didn't want to lose that because of its relationship with health beliefs and illness. And then our staff and external organisations were able to come up with another 27 diversity characteristics. And these are situations and conditions that can make it difficult for people to participate in their care. We heard lots of stories about how a situation or a condition made it difficult for somebody to participate in their care. But of course, this is not an exhaustive list. We had an enormous debate about including pets, because when people have pets, they don't want to leave their home, and they will neglect their health because of their pet. So there was a great discussion about that, and many others. We couldn't include them all. The circle wasn't big enough. So part of the training is, these are ones that we've identified as common and shared, but of course there are others, and it's about the individual and eliciting that from the individual.
Thank you for that. And I might just continue to ask a couple of questions about it, because I was really very interested to see what went in and what didn't go in, and so there are some things that look as though there is enormous overlap in some categories, and then there are others which just seem unexpected. Others that are not unexpected, but they're only unexpected if you haven't, until you think about it. Like hoarding, for example. I was a bit surprised to see hoarding there, and then I thought about it and I thought, well, in terms of residential care, hoarding would be kind of an obvious one, because you end up often in a much tiny space, and if you're a hoarder, you've got real problems. And then comorbidities. So, I mean, I'm giving these as kind of examples that others who are listening may not have focused upon, but it did cause me to think, how on earth would you go about deciding, by what rigorous process do you decide what goes in the circle and what doesn't go in the circle, especially when you, having mentioned the ones that I just have, then you've got this other one, end of life, by which you don't mean ageing. No. So can you tell us something about the rigorous process?
So the rigour was through a range of methodologies, as I mentioned, informed by literature. But I think the most informative aspect of the whole process was what our staff told us, what they see out in the community and in the accommodation that we provide. And that's how they got on there. It was really advice from our staff, because ultimately it's the staff that are going to be trained with this product.
Thank you.
Nothing arising. Thank you, Commissioner.
Well, Ms. Michael, thank you very much. It was a very interesting process and very thought-provoking. Thank you very much indeed. You're free to go.
Thank you.
Commissioner, we're running ahead of schedule. We propose to have a longer lunch, if that's convenient to you, and call our final witness, Ms Elizabeth Khan, at 2 o'clock as previously planned?
Yes, I think that's satisfactory from the Commission's point of view. We'll adjourn now till 2 o'clock.
Can you write it down? Can you write it down? I call Elizabeth Ann Khan.
I swear by Almighty God
That I shall well and truly interpret
that I shall well and truly interpret
the evidence about to be given
the evidence about to be given
and all other matters and things
and all other matters and things
that may be required of me in this case
that may be required of me in this
to
case,
the best of my skill and ability.
to the best of my skill and ability. Nicole Peter Clark, Auslan Interpreter.
Repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that I shall well and truly interpret
that I should well and truly interpret
the evidence about to be given
the evidence about to be given
and all other matters and things
and all other matters and things
that may be required of me in this case
that may be required of me in this case
to the best of my skill and ability.
to the best of my skill and ability. Kylie Clear, Auslan Interpreter.
I solemnly and sincerely
I solemnly and sincerely
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
will be the truth,
will be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
What is your full name?
My name is Elizabeth Khan.
How old are you?
I'm 68 years old.
Where do you live, Miss Khan?
I live in Wollongong, New South Wales.
Have you prepared a statement for the Royal Commission?
Yes, I have.
Is there a copy of your statement in front of you?
Yes, it's here.
Do you have any amendments to your statement?
No, I'd like to leave it as it is.
Is it true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, it's completely true.
I tender the statement of Elizabeth Ann Khan, dated the 3rd of October 2019.
Thank you. The statement of Elizabeth Khan, dated the 3rd of October 2019 will be Exhibit 10-28.
Ms Khan, you are here with your daughter today.
Yes, that's correct.
Tina is supporting you as you give evidence.
Yes.
How many children do you have?
I have 4 children.
How many grandchildren do you have?
Lots. I've got 11 grandchildren.
What is your husband's name?
My husband's name is Walter Khan.
In your statement, you say that you and your husband are profoundly deaf.
Yes, that's correct.
What does this mean?
I was actually born able to hear. And at about the age of 4, I got meningitis, which caused profound deafness. Differently, my husband was born deaf, never able to hear.
In communicating with me at the moment, what language are you using?
I'm using Auslan, Australian Sign Language.
How is Auslan different to other languages?
Auslan is a manual language, so we spell words with our fingers, we use our hands, our facial expression and our body language to communicate completely.
What other interpreting services do you use?
Usually I use my daughter as an interpreter.
Does your daughter live close by?
No, quite a distance away. An hour and a half away actually from my home.
If your daughter travels to your house to interpret for you, does she spend 3 hours in the car?
Yes, she's an hour and a half away, so it's a 3-hour round trip.
What is a relay service?
The relay service is a service that deaf people can use to speak to people, to communicate with people who can't sign. So it's an internet-based service.
How does it work?
So through the computer, I would type to someone, even off an iPhone or iPad, and that person would then speak to the person on the telephone that I want to talk to.
How do you communicate if your daughter's not free and there's no interpreter available?
So if I was in the situation where I needed to communicate with someone, I'd have to get pen and paper out and write to them.
Do you prefer Auslan of those options?
Absolutely. Auslan is my language, so communication is so easy in Auslan.
How often do you use Auslan in everyday life?
So really it depends what I need. If I had to communicate something really serious, then I would absolutely insist on having an interpreter. If it was something really minor to communicate, I would probably make do with pen and paper.
Could you give an example of when you would use an Auslan interpreter for something serious?
So if I went to the bank and I had to speak to the bank manager about selling some property or my superannuation, so when my husband was getting close to wanting to leave work and we needed to make some decisions about our super, if I had to speak to a solicitor, even as minor as needing to understand what's wrong with my car, speaking to the mechanic. You know, when he writes down those strange words that I don't understand to do with the car, an Auslan interpreter would help me understand everything.
Ms. Khan, how old were you when you applied to the NDIS?
It was just before I turned 65. It was almost 64 when I jumped in and applied to the NDIS.
How did you hear about the NDIS?
So I had heard talk about the NDIS through the Deaf Society, and we were so excited. I caught a train all the way to Sydney to get the information and go to a workshop, filled out some application forms, and they said, "How old are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm not 65 yet." As soon as they found out where I lived, they said, "Oh, rollout doesn't happen in your area for a couple of years." So I was almost 64, and they told me I was going to miss out.
What services did you want?
What I wanted was access to interpreters. I'd like a flashing fire alarm and perhaps a flashing front door bell. Access to using an iPad so I could get some VRI interpreting, that's video relay interpreting.
What was the outcome of your application to NDIA?
The NDIA told me, "Sorry, you can't get in." They hadn't rolled out in my area before I turned 65.
How old were you when you applied to My Aged Care, Ms. Khan?
It was just after I turned 65 when the NDIA made it very clear I couldn't apply. I thought, okay, well, I'll apply for My Aged Care because they told me I'm the age.
What services did you want?
Could you repeat that, please?
What services did you want from My Aged Care?
Well, I asked for interpreter access, that's all.
What was the outcome of your application?
And they said, "No, sorry, we don't have that service in My Aged Care. We provide interpreters for spoken languages, but not for Auslan."
How did you feel, Ms. Khan?
I felt really excluded.
And why was that?
So it was like they forgot deaf people. They didn't provide any kind of support.
What services would you have used the Auslan interpreter for if you had been successful?
Well, all those personal appointments I spoke about.
How do you manage How do you manage appointments now without an Auslan interpreter?
My daughter has to become my interpreter or do things for me.
If you were to pay for an Auslan interpreter to come with you to an appointment, what would that cost?
Lots of money. $240 for up to 2 hours of interpreting is the standard cost.
Ms. Khan, you're a member of the hearing impaired community, including Australian Deaf Elders Facebook group.
Yes.
Do any members of your community have access to Auslan interpreters that you know about?
Those who are over 65 have no access, just like me. Those in the Facebook group that I'm part of, the one you mentioned, the Deaf Elders, some of them get access, but those over 65 have no access to interpreting services.
Now, how do you feel about that, Ms. Khan?
Really isolated and left out. it's like this barrier that we just can't push through.
Ms Khan, could you please read from paragraphs 16 and 17 of your statement?
I'll sign that. Shall I start now?
Thank you very much, Ms Khan.
As a deaf elder, I'm exhausted. I feel broken-hearted. So many of my friends are in the same situation as me. We feel excluded, ignored, and isolated. Because of our age and our disability, we are forgotten. Where do we belong? When are we going to be included and accepted as a valued part of the Australian citizen? We just want the right to gain access to services and funding that allows deaf seniors, deaf elders, to have the right to communicate freely in our country. If I can continue, Auslan deaf elders wish to access my aged care, Auslan interpreting packages. Like our deaf peers who are under 65, who now have the NDIS. This would provide us with the access to the wider community without the language and communication barriers that are experienced in our everyday life.
Thank you, Mrs Khan. Why was it important for you to give evidence to the Royal Commission today?
I want access for me, but support the many, many seniors, deaf people in Australia who are over 65, who want equality, who want to be included in the community.
Is there anything else you wanted to say, Ms Khan, or something you wanted to read out?
Yes, there is something more. Deaf people over 65 access the same life and specialised services that people under 65 do. The government is not considering us. They're not considering our needs. My Aged Care is not providing for us the way they do for other people our age.
Thank you, Mrs Khan. Thank you, Commissioners. That concludes my examination.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Khan. I'd like to ask you whether you or your friends have applied through My Aged Care for access to home care or residential care services.
Some deaf people in Sydney that I'm aware of have applied for home care, and so they are in a situation where they need someone to help clean the house or do some cooking for them. But My Aged Care does not provide any access for personal interpreting.
It must be very difficult for you or for other people with hearing impairment when carers come to your house. How does it work that you're able to communicate in those circumstances?
So in the past, I have actually heard people, when I'm in Sydney, I'm chatting with my friends, and they tell stories of people coming to their house to provide those in-home care services, and they have to communicate by writing notes to each other, if the person can understand. there are some very generous people who have gone and learnt a little bit of Auslan. And so I've heard some really lovely stories where carers realise they need some sign language skill.
If people who are hearing impaired develop dementia, do they lose the ability to sign, or what happens with communication?
Their sign language changes. So they become, it's like a simplised version of sign language.
In residential care, there are many people who haven't been deaf for a long time but develop deafness over time. Are you aware of any arrangements that help those people communicate?
I couldn't actually tell you. I don't know a lot about that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Ms. Khan, thank you very much for coming to give evidence. It is very important for the Commission to have heard of your situation and for the community and the government to have heard about it too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioners.
Mr Gray QC will now make a closing submission.
Ms. Khan, you're free to go if you wish. And I should have also thanked those who have come and are in the body of the court to have heard Ms. Khan's evidence. I think she has spoken for more than just herself, and I hope that those in the audience who have come to hear her are happy with that fact and to give her support. Thank you. Mr. Gray.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I think you had been angling for an extra 5 minutes. I think you had been angling for an extra 5 minutes. You have it.
Thank you. In this hearing, we've led evidence about the response of aged care providers and the aged care system to the needs of people of diverse backgrounds, experiences and characteristics. As in previous hearings of the Royal Commission, in this hearing we have been privileged to witness powerful accounts of or about the experiences of people in the aged care system. This evidence has been at the very core of the hearing. We heard from Angelos Angeli about his mother's experiences, from Anne Tudor about caring for her friend and spouse, Edie, and their experiences with the system, from Brian Lynch, Janet Maguire, Malloy, from Uncle Brian Campbell and Uncle Brian Birch, and just now from Elizabeth Khan. All of these witnesses spoke about their experiences, and we heard from Katerina Nieuwenhoven based on her knowledge acquired as a community liaison officer. We've also heard evidence from dedicated service providers including Samantha Jewell, Nathan Kling, Helen Radoslavich, Dr Duncan McKellar, David Panter, Margaret Drodds, Maureen Lyons and Jacqueline Michael. Several of the witnesses have suffered significant trauma in the past and are living with its effects. Their evidence was given courageously and at evident personal cost. We're very grateful for their efforts in giving evidence to the Royal Commission. There are some basic points that are clear from their accounts and from other evidence received in this and in other hearings. Aged care must be accessible to the individuals who need it and tailored to their needs. It must be planned and delivered in consultation with them and with their family or other loved ones, and in a way that respects their choices. It must involve respectful communication and trust between the provider organisation its staff and the person who needs care. In short, it must be person-centred care that is planned and delivered through caring and respectful relationships. This cannot occur without a deep understanding on the part of the provider and its staff of the diversity of experience, background and characteristics of older people in Australia. There are myriad ways in which a failure to appreciate and respond appropriately to that diversity can result in barriers to communication, trust and respect. The ways in which this can occur range from obvious matters, such as a language barrier, through to more subtle failures to inculcate culturally safe care in the care environment. This can inhibit people from being able to communicate their needs. It follows that caring for people with diverse needs must be core business for aged care providers. Close attention and positive efforts are needed, and the work must be reviewed and improved continuously, all the way through the aged care system, from linking people who need care to the point of access to the system, through the day-to-day interactions relating to in-home care or on the floor of the residential care service, up through the corporate governance structure of the provider organisations to the making of policy at a systematic level. Responding to diversity is a quality and safety issue. Responding to diversity must also permeate the quality and safety monitoring and regulatory framework. Commissioners, I'll now address some of the key themes which emerged from the evidence during the week. The first point is that caring for diversity is central and not merely incidental. If due care and attention is not given to catering for diversity, it's easy for services to be delivered in a standardised way. Avoiding this requires a systemic response. Individual characteristics need to be acknowledged and addressed by individual aged care providers and by the incentives and requirements which apply at the systemic level. For example, Ms Samantha Edmonds of the National LGBTI Health Alliance and chair of the diversity subgroup of the Aged Care Sector Committee explained the importance of, and I quote, having a whole aged care system that's actually inclusive of people regardless of their diversity needs and that recognises those diversity needs and puts them at the centre rather than add-ons and additions, close quote. That said, Commissioners, care is needed to avoid merely categorising people into cohorts of the population. There was evidence, for example, that a person might have different adverse experiences and exacerbated trauma from having multiple kinds of diverse needs. Dr Philip O'Mara spoke of the Victorian Government Department of Health and Human Services designing for diversity approach and its tools, which encourage human services providers in Victoria to cater for the intersectional nature of diversity. These tools acknowledge the need for policymakers and for service providers to understand a broad range of potentially overlapping characteristics, including, amongst other things, religion, gender, sexual orientation, cultural language and communication requirements, and other matters in order to effectively respond to a person's needs. Mr David Panter, CEO of ECH in Adelaide, explained that the current aged care system does not respond well to intersectionality, as this requires a degree of sophistication which in his view is currently beyond the majority of providers in the sector. The next theme is communication. As a starting point, the witnesses emphasised how critical it is for people accessing and receiving aged care to be able to communicate, to be able to understand and be understood. Ms Patetsos explained that people have a right to know what is happening and the right to professional interpreters in situations where the correct level of interpretation is required, and aged care is a perfect example of this. Without an ability to communicate, the basic rights of people are undermined and they can become socially isolated. The right to be understood was also emphasised just in this afternoon's evidence from Ms Elizabeth Khan. The absence of Auslan interpreting services in the My Aged Care framework is disturbing and unacceptable. And the issue is not only access to Auslan, there are significant limitations in interpreting services available in the aged care system and doubt whether it is sufficient to assist people to meet the very significant challenge of navigating an overly complex system and making their care needs known when they come from a called background. Commissioners, you heard evidence that, even putting language to one side, communication of needs will not occur unless people feel safe to disclose their background and life experiences. A number of witnesses noted that trust can be difficult for many diverse groups, as organisations providing aged care have sometimes themselves been involved with their negative life experiences, and there can be a lack of trust in what's seen as an authority figure. Ms Edmonds explained that after experiences of abuse and often of institutionalisation, we're now saying to the very people who've suffered that discrimination, and I quote, hey, come and trust these services that actually discriminated against you for your whole lifetime. You know, you can trust them now. They're going to do person-centred care, you'll be fine, and you'll get good services, close quote. This leads to the concepts of cultural safety and also trauma-informed care. We heard evidence of the importance of providers and their workforce being educated and understanding diversity, cultural safety and trauma-informed care in order to be able to deliver high-quality care that meets the unique needs of every person, respecting their background and past experiences. Ms Maguire, a Forgotten Australian, explained, for example, that educating people that Forgotten Australians were abused as children helps people to understand their history and that they may act in particular ways. Every provider in Australia has a responsibility to meet the individual needs of their care recipients without discrimination. Malloy highlighted that providers need to be aware of the cycle of invisibility, and Ms Edmonds explained this cycle. If care is not being offered in an environment of cultural safety, and if needs are not communicated, they're simply never going to be identified, with individual ramifications not only for the safety, health and well-being of the person concerned, but also with systemic consequences, because accurate data on the needs of diverse groups will never become available. Witnesses emphasised the importance of asking questions about diversity to break the cycle of invisibility, while at the same time understanding that you can't only ask people at the initial point of contact when people may not feel comfortable disclosing personal information. Appropriate occasions have to be sought and the question has to be asked, potentially, at multiple times. Ms Radoslavich said that sometimes they will have worked with someone for a long time before they declare particular information. She said, we need to be open and to listen all the time and to be quick to respond. Ms Nolene Tunney, of Victorian Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation, VECCHO, made the point on Monday that it is impossible to deliver person-centred care without embedding culturally safe care. She also said we have to, and I quote, look at the holistic quality of care and take care outside an individualised Western medical model when considering care for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Dr Duncan McKellar identified trauma-informed care as part of a person-centred approach to care. He noted, and I quote, to achieve a truly person-centred approach to care that will include intrinsically within it an understanding that everyone has some kind of trauma theme that they will have encountered within their life story. Dr McKellar outlined available approaches that organisations can adopt to enable them to provide trauma-informed care. Commissioners, the next theme I wish to address is leadership and culture and the concept of co-design. The Royal Commission is regularly hearing evidence about the importance of leadership. It's a topic that straddles virtually every area of its inquiry, and this hearing was no exception. Many of the witnesses spoke of leadership from the top by boards and executives, and also of passionate staff who act as leaders within their organisations and go above and beyond. Mr Kling held up the board of RSL Care SA as a good model of leadership. Mr Panda described ensuring that the organisation is authentic is a key challenge for ECH in embracing diversity. And he said this required the leadership of the organisation, both the board and the executive, to fully understand and support the approach taken. Ms Tudor encountered an example of good leadership at the facility where she was welcomed with her partner Edie. Recruitment is critical. Dr McKellar described the importance of a values-based workforce as a core element of recruitment in his opinion. Such a workforce, he said, and I quote, is going to bring passion and care and commitment and humanity. Dr McKellar said values need to go across whole organisations, from the CEO through to the people that are managing hotel services or cleaning or delivering food. A number of witnesses referred to the need to involve the relevant community of people in or seeking care through co-production or co-design, so their diverse backgrounds and life experiences can be integrated in service design. Witnesses talked about co-design as an opportunity to involve the targeted community of people with diverse backgrounds and life experiences, and organisations representing them to design how services work, are developed, and also to advise government. The next theme is navigation and assistance. At this hearing, as with almost every other hearing of the Royal Commission, we heard about difficulties people face in understanding and using the current system, including the need for improved advocacy and assistance with navigation of the system. These problems are compounded for people of certain diverse backgrounds. Ms Tunney stated, "My aged care has proved disastrous for Aboriginal people." Ms York highlighted the challenges faced by people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. Aged care and the idea of ageing in place are predicated, she said, on the assumption that someone owns their own home and can sell their home or move and can sell their home in order to move into residential care. She stressed that insecure or inadequate housing can have a huge impact on the delivery of home care. She noted that she'd heard of clients with a home care package or Commonwealth Home Support Program services where workers have had to be withdrawn due to an unsafe working environment in the home. Ms Drodds spoke to issues experienced by the called population, noting, so the first barrier that comes to mind is truly being able to communicate in English. And we know that migrants who came in the 60s and 70s, they often haven't had the same opportunities to acquire good English. What we also know from the census data is that certain ethnic communities do not use the internet in a significant way. So when information is available online, well, that is not information that they can access. Close quote. We heard from several witnesses about the access and support program which operates in Victoria as part of the Commonwealth Home Support Program after transitioning from the former Home and Community Care Program. It appears this program is only available in Victoria. Ms Michael noted, my aged care may act as a barrier for some people with diverse characteristics accessing care. There are few culturally appropriate navigation and advocacy services nationally. I'm aware that the Access and Support Program in Victoria is making a valuable contribution to the aged care sector. It is successfully providing culturally appropriate support and access/navigation to special needs populations. Close quote. Department of Health witnesses of the Commonwealth were not familiar with this program, but acknowledged it was relevant to the work being done to pilot system navigators. That's a reference to the current navigator trial that is being conducted by the Department of Health or on its behalf. After Dr Hartland gave his evidence, the Royal Commission received a submission from the Access and Support Program Coordinator, at the Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria, referring to Dr. Hartland's evidence and drawing attention to an evaluation report in 2015 by HDG Consulting Group titled Home and Community Care Diversity Planning and Practice Implementation Review Project. I'll ask the operator to display this on the screen now. RCD stop 9999 stop 0232 stop 0001. Commissioners, this document includes descriptions and evaluations of the programs relating to diversity advisors and access and support, amongst other things. Commissioners, I seek to tender this document by way of adding it to the general tender bundle in the hearing as new tab 138.
Yes.
Thank you.
Consent for that, tab.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioners, Dr. O'Mara told you that funding agreements under the program are currently in place until mid next year, 2020, and that the program is currently in a transitional period which will come to an end at about that time. He explained that Victorian officials are in discussions with the Department of Health of the Commonwealth to ensure there is continuity of service. We will monitor developments on this topic. Ms. Katarina Nieuwenhoven noted in her experience as a community liaison officer, and I quote, "Older people from the community have told me that they don't know how to use their aged care packages. Some of the people in the Dutch group that I've spoken to don't know what they're entitled to. They don't know how to approach my aged care." This leads me, Commissioners, to the next theme, which is the theme of government policy and administration. As to that matter, while some progress is being made, much remains to be done, and in various respects, no progress has been made at all. To take an example, the foundation of good policy is information. The Tune Review identified deficiencies in data about care for diverse groups in 2017, and Mr Tune made recommendations for improvement which have still not been adequately implemented by the Department of Health. There appears to have been little or no real urgency shown in the task. First Assistant Secretary Jay Smith's evidence indicates that work on an overarching data governance project is yet to commence. First Assistant Secretary Nicholas Hartland has been involved in an aspect of the task, but even this did not commence until about a year after the Tune report, and it appears it's bogged down in technical difficulties at present. The upshot is that it is not possible for a person to have their membership of a special needs group identified as part of their client record in the My Aged Care system. This is an important issue. We've heard that the lack of reliable data collection, and consequently its analysis, is a fundamental issue, holding back the system and the sector when it comes to supporting care for people with diverse needs and experiences. Many witnesses lamented the absence of reliable data collection and analysis. They noted how critical it is to collect and make available information at every point, not just for those who succeed in accessing aged care, but also for those we know experience barriers in accessing care. As Mary Patetsos said, it's absolutely critical that we collect data at critical points on entry and on every point where it's possible. Without this data, that's the end of the quote, I should say. Without this data and proper contextual data, pardon me, this is the continuation of the quote. Without this data and proper contextual data, it's not possible to confirm if the current system or changes to the system are meeting the needs of vulnerable older Australians. Further, a much better understanding is needed about the extent to which there might be unmet demand. A number of direct evidence witnesses stated their desire to be identified within aged care data. Ms Tudor explained that she would have valued being asked, and I quote, "Are you a couple? Have you been together long?" So that we were known, more you know, as people, given the stigma in the past that was associated with being part of the LGBTI community. Close quote. Ms Maguire would like forgotten Australians to be identified on paperwork, and I quote, "Being identified allows people to understand someone is a forgotten Australian and has unique needs. It would help the government departments understand why we react to things in a certain way." Close quote. Ms Elizabeth Cosson, the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, acknowledged the deficiencies in data for veterans and the lack of sophistication of data collection and data matching across relevant departments. On a number of occasions, she indicated a desire to move towards improvements in this area, not just within her own department, but across government. However, she expected that improvements were, and I quote, "a few years down the track." We heard that the lack of data held by the department on all the special needs groups had limited the available analysis of the impact of changes to the system for allocating home care packages. Dr Hartland said in this respect, and I quote, "So we have some data that we can give you on how 6 of the special needs groups have fared post the increasing choice measures, but as we've discussed, we don't have data on care leavers, parents separated from their children, and LGBTI groups." Close quote. This leads me to the theme of policy reform processes. The evidence about policy reform on aged care's response to diversity suggests that while impressive documentation has been prepared, there's uncertainty about the extent to which providers and government will actually implement what is in that documentation and what is needed. We heard about the key role of the Aged Care Sector Committee Diversity Subgroup. It plays an important role in attempting to ensure the needs and issues of people with diverse life experiences and characteristics are heard and listened to across the aged care sector. A panel of members of the subgroup on Monday, consisting of Ms Edmonds, Ms Patetsos and Ms Tunny, was very informative in this regard. Facing resistance from sector bodies, the subgroup has prepared the diversity framework and associated action plans, 3 of them with 1 more in progress. And these are in some sense adopted or to be adopted as government documents, but they are not binding. It is unclear whether and how assessors of the Quality Commission will be guided by them in assessing compliance with the quality standards. The position of Ms Anne Wunsch from the Commission, that is from the Quality Commission, was that they should not become mandatory requirements, but they are available to be used in some way during assessment. Disturbingly, providers are allowed to make representations on the My Aged Care portal that they, the providers, are specialists in providing care for specified groups without there being any requirement for them to verify this in advance, and until recently, without there being any monitoring by government of the truth of these claims. Mr Smith from the Department of Health acknowledged that the lack of a quality assurance process to verify the claims of providers on My Aged Care needs to be looked at seriously and with urgency. Ms Wunsch of the Quality Commission gave evidence that after this issue was raised by the Royal Commission and with effect from late September 2019, teams of assessors are now and will be giving attention to this issue. It remains to be seen whether this will be a sufficient response to this important issue. Turning now to another important gap in the regulatory process. As pointed out by Ms Michael, while providers have for many years obtained aged care places, which confer the right to subsidy, on the basis of conditions, or essentially promises, that the providers will accord priority to special needs groups identified in applications for those places, there's been no follow-up from government agencies about the use of these residential aged care places. There's therefore no accountability holding providers to conditions about according priority to people from particular special needs groups. I explored this issue with Mr. Smith. I suggested that an elaborate, centrally planned allocation exercise, the ACAR, has been going on at great expense and in a very resource-intensive manner, without there being any notion on the part of the department as to whether it's meeting the needs of diverse groups. And Mr. Smith agreed. Mr. Smith also agreed with your suggestion, Commissioner Pagoni, that it is indefensible for the government to put an obligation on providers relating to responding to diverse needs, but not to monitor whether that obligation has been met. Dr. Hartland described the current process for allocating places to special needs groups that previously operated in the home care sector and continues to operate in residential care, that is the ACAR, as inadequate. A number of witnesses spoke of difficulties arising from the interactions and silos between levels of government and between different agencies of government. For example, Ms York indicated the housing and homelessness sector focuses on younger people and family violence, not ageing, and the aged care sector doesn't understand homelessness. She also noted that every state has different legislation governing tenancies, which can be tricky for those working in the sector. Ms Cosson noted deficiencies and her dissatisfaction with these deficiencies in the interface between DVA, Department of Veteran Affairs Services, and Department of Health aged care programs. And she said that the systems do not talk to each other. This point was accepted by Dr. Hartland of the Department of Health, who agreed that progress to improve interaction between the relevant systems has been frustratingly slow. It's clear that these silos need to be broken down. Consumer-directed care, which has applied as the delivery model for home care packages since February 2017, was another feature of the evidence this week. It's unclear whether there was an analysis of the impact on special needs groups done by the department before the implementation of consumer-directed care in relation to home care packages in February 2017. Dr. Hartland was unable to identify any such impact analysis during the hearing. Dr. Hartland pointed to data since February 2017, and he compared that to data about the allocation of home care places, as they were called, before that date. He claimed that the data suggested that, to the extent that some special needs groups could be identified in the data, it appeared they were marginally better off, or at least not significantly worse off. He also pointed to some survey material, although that is based on limited sample sets. The data is very limited, and in our submission, it's not sufficiently reliable to draw any firm conclusions. Many witnesses were negative about the experience of consumer-directed care for people from diverse backgrounds and life experiences. However, it was acknowledged that the lack of data made it difficult to determine if it's meeting their needs or not. Ms Patetsos suggested that the high underutilisation, if I can put it that way, of home care package funding could imply people don't understand consumer-directed care. She suggested that the same pattern being seen in the NDIS for called people means that we haven't got it right. As we've heard for other people defined as so-called special needs groups under the Aged Care Act, Ms York suggested block funding allows flexibility in the approach for services targeting people who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless. A number of witnesses have indicated that diverse groups can't rely on the market to meet the needs of everybody, and there will be people who fall through the gaps. However, we've also heard that the market may create possibilities and opportunities for providers to tailor their services to particular diverse groups. We heard that this was the view of the Department of Health when it implemented reforms to that mechanism for delivery of home care packages in February 2017. Dr. Hartland said in this regard, and I quote, "So we thought at the time that this was actually One of the big rationales for changing to this system was actually to help special needs. So at the time, the thinking was that this new system of a fairer way of putting people on the queue would actually help special needs groups. Close quote. However, as I've said, he didn't point to any impact analysis done prior to February 2017. I'll now conclude. The current aged care system does not allow us to track or monitor access for many special needs groups. The system is transitioning from a centrally planned system to one with a more marketised and consumer-directed approach. This appears to have been embarked upon with insufficient consideration of how the impact on diverse groups will be monitored. This must be remedied as a priority. We've been struck by the apparent lack of accountability in the system in relation to the measures intended to respond to diversity. We're left wondering whether practice on the ground matches the rhetoric of the commitments to diversity in the Aged Care Diversity Framework and in its associated action plans. Unfortunately, the lack of data and proactive monitoring leaves us in the Council assisting team without a satisfactory answer to the question. We're unable to assist you, Commissioners, with anything more concrete as a result of those deficiencies. One thing we can submit is that the current situation is inadequate and must be fixed. There are two possible reasons that it has not been fixed: a lack of will or a lack of resources. We've heard evidence from Dr. Hartland that the issue is not a lack of resources, at least in respect of the data matters that he was addressing. That leaves us with concerns in our submission about the will of the department to drive reform that responds to the needs of people with diverse background and experiences. Embracing and respecting diversity, as I've said, must not be an add-on or a token gesture. In our submission, the Commonwealth Department of Health has much to learn from the Victorian Department of Health and Human Services Designing for Diversity framework and guidance material. As a final note about the evidence in the hearing, I wish to repeat this message from Ms. Tudor, and I quote, "We all have to be very mindful that when somebody who has a very different background comes into residential care, that extra effort is made to assist that person to settle in and to have a life there that is, worthy of them as human beings and provides them with what they need. So someone who looks different or someone who is different, we need to be celebrating this. We need to be celebrating diversity and not be frightened of it." Close quote. The Royal Commission has received many submissions from individuals and organisations about diversity and aged care. There's not been time in this hearing to hear from all of those individuals and organisations. A selection of the submissions that have been received are now published on the Aged Care Royal Commission website. They include submissions from the Ethnic Communities Council of New South Wales in conjunction with Seniors' Rights Services, Flemington Chinese Golden Age, Tamil Senior Citizens Fellowship Victoria Inc., Multicultural Aged Care, National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation, Alliance for Forgotten Australians, and others. These are just some of the submissions that are now published, and we anticipate publishing more submissions in the future. Commissioners, earlier today, you made directions for any written submissions by parties with leave to appear in this hearing to be provided to you by 5 p.m. on the 25th of October 2019, and for reply submissions to be provided to you within 7 days afterwards. Finally, I wish to place on the record some information about the scope of the interim report, which will be submitted to the Governor-General at the end of the month. The text of the interim report, prepared by Commissioner Tracy and by you, Commissioner Briggs, was settled at the end of September. This was necessary to meet publication deadlines to enable delivery to the Governor-General by the end of this month. The interim report will include information about Commissioner Tracy and Commissioner Briggs' overall impressions about the aged care system, and more detailed analysis of a limited number of topics. The interim report will not take into account the detail of the evidence at the Brisbane hearing relating to regulatory responses, and will not include evidence from this hearing on diversity in aged care or the evidence at next week's hearing about workforce issues. The Royal Commission's next hearing commences here in Melbourne at 9:15 a.m, Monday the 14th of October, and it will focus, as I've said, on workforce issues. Commissioners, please.
Mr. Gray, thank you for those closing submissions. If you would please pass on our gratitude to all members of Council and the number of people behind the scenes, some of whom are here in various positions and some who are not here, for the work that you've done in preparing the submissions. I think it's important to say that publicly because often the processes that take place in a hearing like this must to the public seem an easy exercise without really understanding or appreciating the enormous amount of time and effort that goes into its preparation. We, of course, are closer to that, and so we see it, but we should put on record both our gratitude and also our appreciation of the amount of time and effort that is involved by not just you, but all of those behind you. Please pass that on.
I will. Thank you, Commissioner.
We'll now adjourn and the hearings will recommence next Monday at 9:15.